people you've never met and who may even be thousands of miles away, and literally see through their eyes so vividly that you can describe precisely what they're looking at. It's called remote viewing. And one of the world's finest exponents who's worked for people at NASA is sitting right over here, Joe McMoneagle. Thank you for coming this evening, Joe. Is it really possible to see through someone else's eyes or sense through their senses?
Actually, we're not sure exactly how it works, but it is possible to report on the position or place that they're located.
If you want to know how the trigger mechanism works on a Chinese nuclear weapon, out of body's better, because you can go to the Chinese nuclear weapon, put your face in it, look around, do detailed drawing. But if you want to know where all the parts from the weapon came from, remote viewing's better.
So we had an experiment set up at Stanford that was a very sensitive quantum chip inside of electrical shielding, inside of magnetic shielding, inside of superconducting shielding, completely acoustically isolated from the environment. No way anything on the outside could affect that little chip. And I asked him, well, how'd you know what to do? He said, well, I didn't know what to do, so I just looked inside through all this shielding. And he drew a diagram of what was inside there that had never been published. And he said, well, this is when I put my attention on it, that just happened.
So he drew an accurate diagram of all the shielding that you had around this equipment.
And the little quantum chip and its circuitry deep inside.
And when you say he was able to affect something, what in particular was he able to affect?
Well, in general, there was a big oscillating signal coming out of the thing that ran about 30 seconds or so. And then when he affected it, it just stopped oscillating. And then he said, you want me to do something else? And then he made it oscillate fast. And that's when when the graduate students sort of went berserko. So I said, well, I'm sure that was just some kind of coincidental glitch. And he did it again. I then wrote this up and circulated around to other physicists. And pretty soon the CIA come landing on my doorstep and said, oh, have we been looking for you? And he said, we have a problem. The Russians have been spending millions of dollars at their best institutes trying to use ESP for espionage purposes. And we don't know how to evaluate it. I mean, no scientist in America even believes there is such a thing. And yet you did this experiment, and it looked like this guy could actually get inside this device and describe it and affect it. And here you're at SRI. We have lots of black projects here anyway, so we'd like to check him out. Can you bring him back and let us come and do some experiments with him?
Welcome back to The Night Shift, your safe space for talking about UFOs, UAPs, NHI, disclosure, and everything else your friends, family, and coworkers are so sick and tired of hearing you go on and on and on about. We talk about many strange things on this channel, but perhaps my favorite among them is the phenomenon of remote viewing. If you don't know what remote viewing is, that's okay. I'll explain it to you. Remote viewing is the process by which an individual is able to access information about people, places, objects, events that are located thousands of miles away, possibly even in different periods of time. And they're able to produce granular, detailed information about these locations, these targets. There's a lot of confusing information out there, particularly on YouTube, but just in general on the internet, about what remote viewing is capable of and what it all can mean. So I wanted to bring on a guest who could speak to that and who could help us sort of develop a framework we can use to assess the information that comes out of different remote viewers and kind of put it in context. Because after all, we do hear a lot of off the charts, pretty wild stuff from various different remote viewers. And though it can be accurate and we really don't have a way to verify this stuff, I wanted to address that and bring on somebody who could educate us a little bit more about how to think about remote viewing. And not only how to think about it, but put it in historical context for us and explain this whole history. I recently had the chance to sit down with a gentleman named John Cook, who is the former president of the International Remote Viewing Association. Now, if you're not familiar with the IRVA was basically founded by the top names in remote viewing. Its founders are right here. Hal Puthoff, co-founder of SRI's remote viewing program. David Hathcock, organizing facilitator and retired business executive. John Alexander, U.S. Army colonel, retired Special Forces and Intelligence. Lynn Buchanan, former U.S. Army remote viewer and trainer, probably one of the best out there. Paul H. Smith, another remote viewer and trainer. Skip Atwater, former U.S. Army RV Unit Operations and Training Officer. Angela Thompson Smith, RV researcher, author, and trainer. Marcelo Truzzi, Russell Targ, Stephen Schwartz. This is the group that started the IRVA, and they were basically founded for the purpose of helping people understand remote viewing in a way that makes sense, and to kind of ensure that there was quality information reaching the public about what it is and what its capabilities are. So John Cook was the president of the IRVA from 2016 to 2022. He has been involved in remote viewing since 1998. He holds a bachelor's degree in theology, a choice he says he does not entirely regret. And he has spent the past 25 years working as a systems analyst in the corporate world. John has participated in both research and operational remote viewing projects and brings a deep curiosity about how consciousness intersects with the physical and non-physical realms. His interests span precognition, synchronicity, art, artificial intelligence, and personal growth. He's such an easy person to talk to. We instantly had a great rapport. He's just a cool guy, very intelligent, and extremely knowledgeable about the history of remote viewing. I couldn't have asked for a better guest to help me dissect all of this stuff. Without further ado, please enjoy this interview with IRVA former president John Cook. Did you get a chance to see any of the, there were two really weird videos that dropped, the Dan Sherman interview. Did you watch this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I felt like I better watch a couple of those things.
I'm only like 2/3 of the way through it. I think I have about an hour. It's a 3.5 hours?
Yeah. Yeah. That was some work over the last.
I'm working my way through it, but it's worth every minute. It's so good.
Yeah.
Did you see?
I don't know what to make of it, honestly.
There was what's the other guy's name? There was another guy who just
Jordan Jozak.
Jordan Jozak
started throwing some stuff down and then let loose a slide deck of Eric Davis's, allegedly, that I've never seen before.
I saw that,
which has some crazy shit in it that I made sure I stuffed into my notes.
I haven't even had a chance to digest the slide deck. I just kind of thumbed it and I was like, This is. I gave it to ChatGPT to see what it came back with, but
yeah, it's let me see if I can. What did I think the high points were? So it's like 3 years after the Wilson Davis meeting that's talked about in the memo that this presentation was, if the date's true on it, and it just talks about all kinds of crazy stuff like Puharich and the work he did, including with kids, which is starting to become an alarming commonality in some of these recent releases. Yeah. And there was stuff about somebody bringing in someone in 1959 to the CIA's National Photographic Interpretation Center, and a channeler was pulled in and summoned a UFO outside the window, which just sounds like a batshit crazy story, except if this really is an Eric Davis briefing deck, that's kind of weird.
Yeah, you have to take it at face value. I mean,
at some level, yeah. And then they talked some stuff about the RV program and about it allegedly downsizing and shifting and different things like that, which I made note of, and about this whole other rumored project called JEDI.
I missed all of that. What's the JEDI thing? Tell me.
So JEDI is a thing from the early 80s that I think was sort of rumored, but it was supposed to be like another branch of, not related to sort of that Stargate lineage of programs. And it was more based on psi and other types of abilities, but through a neurolinguistic programming angle. So I think that this is where some of that Hawaii methodology came out of.
What is different about the neurolinguistic method? Like, how do you do that neurolinguistically?
Well, so I have not been trained in the Hawaii Remote Viewers Guild method, HRVG, but I've seen a lot of their sessions, and you'll see a thing where like they're using paper like everybody, and you've got a page, but they will draw a mask sort of looking object in the corner, and it's to cue them to do things like you would do with NLP to, okay, I'm going to now try to get information about a particular detail. I'm going to go for it while looking to the right. Now I'm going to do it again, while looking to the left, or, these different kinds of interrogating the target by physically doing, or somewhat physically doing, NLP stuff.
And the people who do that, who use that method, have good results. They seem to.
Their system seems to work pretty well. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. And Glenn Wheaton, who founded the HRVG, when asked about it, basically says that it is pretty much precisely what they were taught in that program. Apparently, they were taught a bunch of other things. I dug back through some of my very, very old emails that I had been meaning to figure out how to open these old crappy Outlook Express database files for a long time. Finally figured it out, and I was digging back through them and actually found a point in 2000 when I had actually reached out to Joe McMoneagle about it, because I was moderating this, what they called the Stargate Yahoo forum, one of these Yahoo email distro list things, just to age myself. People had said, or Glenn had said, that Joe was aware of, his credentials, because Glenn was under some amount of attack during that time about, just making all this up and so on. And Joe came back and very explicitly vouched for the fact that Glenn had received a form of RV training while part of a classified project, I'm reading this now, that had no connection to the Stargate program.
Interesting.
And that was in July of 2000. He also just confirmed that, Glenn was part of a special forces group that participated in a sort of warrior monk type of experiment and was trained in RV at the time, as well as a number of other things, whatever that means.
That's so... I wonder how many parallel or how many separate siloed programs there are, unbeknownst to one another.
That is the thing. And there's stuff that dropped recently in Rogan's interview with Hal. It was a throwaway comment, but I don't think Hal's ever said it before, that after pretty much they had closed up shop at SRI, Hal had moved back to Austin to do his physics stuff, and he was approached from an official source wanting him to be involved in restarting the program. And he just dropped that in the middle of the Rogan interview. And I had never heard that. I don't know if I wasn't paying attention and not doing my job as somebody who, thought that they knew some of these things. But
I wonder if it was, did he say it was a government thing, or was it a private group?
No, he said it was like official government channel person.
Wow.
Asked him to start it. And he said this in response to Joe saying, do you think that, programs ongoing or continued afterward? And he said, yes. He says, I think probably. He's not, there's always the probably, or, it would stand to reason. And then he says, for example, I was asked X.
Yeah, for sure. I can't imagine. I mean, just for the cost, the spend, the potential payoff is so high for something that's so relatively inexpensive to do. Why wouldn't you, if you had any success? What did you make of when Dan Sherman was talking about the school, the kids' school, the GATE program?
I don't have any line on anything to tell me one way or the other, but it is alarming that that's coming up so much.
A lot lately.
And I guess I'm trying to figure out whether, because I do believe there's a lot of misinformation deliberately being thrown into the mix here. When you look at Eric Davis's slide deck that I was mentioning there are points in it that you could make an inference and draw a line to exactly the type of procedure that Jordan was talking about, with them going into this room and having this visualized grid and kind of moving through this thing with coordinates. There's stuff just kind of peppered into Eric Davis's presentation that makes it look, first glance, like, okay, obviously they're talking about the same thing. I don't know, chicken and egg. Like, are all of these revelations coming from truly independent sources, or, not to cast doubt on anybody in particular, but, did somebody find an Eric Davis deck from 2005 and is incorporating it into the Skywatcher narrative with the kids' schools and so on? And I have no sense of which way to think about that right now.
Well, the kids thing makes sense. It it rings true. You know, the NHI experiences that people have talked about for forever, they've always been interested in children.
Yeah.
And mothers in particular. So it makes sense that there would be some kind of a connection. And then I think of like the Ariel case, those school kids, you know, there seems to be some kind of interest and focus on kids one way or not, for one reason or another, whether that's what some kind of ongoing genetic program. It wasn't really clear to me if Dan, when he said his mother was genetically modified, or he was genetically modified in the womb, I guess is what he said. But he didn't make it clear if that was by an NHI group or if that was by a government group that was working in tandem. He just kind of dropped it.
He just kind of dropped it. And I haven't read his book. There's, you know, it's in the shocking pile of books I have not read.
It's in my Amazon shopping cart. I've got to order it.
Yeah. So I don't know whether he's clearer about that elsewhere.
Yeah.
And, you know, this is, I think, in Jordan's drop the other day, some of what he's talking about is like, this is potentially the reason that disclosure is going to be so catastrophic. And that it ultimately boils down to, we've been doing stuff to kids. I don't know. I think there could be other reasons that it could be catastrophic that we could get into at some point.
Oh, I'd love to just, spitball catastrophic ideas with you.
I mean, so this goes way outside my purpose for being here, obviously, which is to talk about RV.
Yeah, we're just talking. We're just talking UFO stuff. Yeah,
UFO stuff. I have come to lean very heavily into the family of explanations that's considered extra-dimensional, but not too rigidly. I think that from experiences that I have had, I think that what we are looking at is that our reality is not what we think it is.
It's not as rock solid as we'd like it to, as we may have been.
That would be a soft way of putting it. I think that, like, I'm not talking about our planet or our galaxy. I'm talking about literally the fundamental nature of our reality, maybe a construct.
I'm very comfortable with that idea too.
Yeah.
I'm not comfortable with it, but I'm comfortable. No. It becomes more comfortable as I examine all of the possibilities. That one feels.
Yeah. And I know it neatly explains a lot of things. It does. And that's not necessarily a reason to believe it, but certain types of experiences, certain types of experiences, what we're learning from people that are doing really careful work with psychedelics, there's a lot of lines that sort of move in that direction. The thing that occurred, the reason I started to think about that, in addition to sort of personal experiences, was that, you know, there's this story that Eric Davis often tells about being at the Pentagon and doing an early UFO briefing. I think maybe John Alexander was there. He referred to it as like UFO 101. And they're doing this briefing. They've got some fancy guys there listening. And at one point, some guy jumps up and just says, "I don't want any part of this. You're not supposed to know any of this until you're dead," and storms out of the room. This is, you know, famous Eric Davis story, and John Alexander too, I think. And it didn't really strike me until maybe a year ago that is not a reasonable response to somebody telling you about extraterrestrials. That doesn't have anything, like, there's guys coming from Mars and they've got better cars than we do. You don't throw up your hands and say you're not supposed to know that until you're dead.
Like, that would be a completely understandable technical challenge that, like, we have the technology, we're suited to deal with that. Like, we could look at that. They're on Mars. They have better cars than we do. We could handle that. Yeah. But yeah, when you get into the esoteric sort of next level.
And if that was part of the briefing, I can see that.
Yeah. I think,
and I don't even know if that guy was wrong that stormed out. Are we supposed to know that? I don't know.
Yeah. And the Jimmy Carter story always jumps to mind, but, you know, what would make a guy like that, you know, cry in the Oval Office? Whether or not that's true, you know, assuming it is true, what would bring somebody to tears, the president?
Probably not Martians, you know?
I just feel like that would be, okay, well, then we got to deal with it and let's figure it out. You know, that's a technical challenge. We'll just get there. But when we're dealing with something that's that much more fundamental to everything. Yeah.
And looking at it through that lens of that even potentially being true, it puts into a certain frame for me all of the theater that we see happening and the jousting around, everybody assuming still that it's largely ET thing with physical nuts and bolts craft that makes sense from a craft sense that we would imagine. And all
what do you mean
that
the theater we see sort of around this? Like, how does that?
I think it might have been Kelly Chase on her podcast or on the new one that she's doing with Jay King that started talking about their conviction that the level of sort of theater that's happening in the disclosure world officially is very much like the World Wrestling Federation or the WWE. I'm never very good at telling the difference between the WWE and the WWF. You've got your heroes, you've got your villains, you've got this basic theater that's going on to keep everybody busy. And a lot of that disclosure narrative that is getting put to Congress, the videos are getting released, the different things is all about physical nuts and bolts objects. I know people have complained that experiencer voices aren't really sometimes heard in some of these contexts. And that might be because we need to be talking, they want it to be talked about, in terms of nuts and bolts stuff.
I think the nuts and bolts thing is a play to classify some stuff so that they can monetize it. I think some of the technology that they're sitting on is probably worth a lot more if they can bring it into the commercial world and out of the, classified world. How many TR-3Bs can you build at $1 trillion, or whatever they cost to make? I don't know. But what if you could, I don't know, patent some of this stuff and then license it. And
it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be actual craft. It can just be lessons that were learned, that allow exploitation or
some kind of superconducting material or something that, maybe Jeff Bezos or Elon would be customers for that. It'd be the thing that for the next century, as we expand out into the solar system, they're going to be doling out little bits of this technology to piece that together. Mm-hmm. How far have you come now that you're at that kind of mindset? What was your point of origin with the UFO thing? Were you pretty much like nuts and bolts, gray aliens like everybody else, or did you have a different idea?
I was somewhat less than that. I was not terribly interested, up to and including most of the time that I was helping run the Remote Viewing Association. I was just not interested. It seemed to me that for some reason there was this overlap of fandoms, somehow. Yeah. There was a lot of these UFO folks and a lot of RV folks. I couldn't figure out why that should be the case. It always kind of was the case. It frankly irritated me because I felt like, we were trying to educate people about remote viewing, trying to keep it responsible, trying to keep it evidence-based, and which is already difficult enough.
Yeah.
And then you introduce like, hey, here's some more stuff. And so I had very little use for it. And it wasn't really until, 2017, like a lot of people, stuff started to hit the fan. A big conference that I helped run in Las Vegas was the one where Hal Puthoff gave his famous sort of mic drop talk about the crash retrieval program and about all of that sort of stuff. And he introduced his talk by saying, this is sort of the first time I'll be able to share some of this stuff with you all in public and not go to jail.
Yeah.
And I was like, so I had managed to insulate myself from a lot of that for a long time, it's amazing what you can, not pay attention to, even if you're involved in other weird stuff. But, and so from there I started pivoting and, started listening to some of the voices. And, I think early on Kelly Chase's, UFO rabbit hole thing was instrumental in kind of getting me kind of paying close attention. And there's a lot of others since, of course, that I've been listening to. But now I'm in this space where I've sort of slid past the nuts and bolts. I do absolutely believe that there are physical objects. I do absolutely believe that there are crash retrieval programs and they're collecting something. And a reverse engineering program is still a reverse engineering program, even if you don't manage to do anything, even if you can't figure it out, as Eric Davis insists that there's no such thing as ARVs, for example.
That makes no sense to me. I don't know
I don't know. But the only thing I can think of is that it's another one of these technical statements that's, technically true.
Yeah, that's not legally defined. What is an ARV? No one really.
What is an ARV? I mean, if you've just sort of inferred some principles or materials, like you said, or something like that, based on the materials you've collected and you've managed to make some cool stuff that outperforms anything, that's still not an ARV, technically. So I don't know what's going on with those statements. It's hard to keep track of everybody's mutually exclusive statements that they make.
Yeah, I think I agree with you, though. I think there's some like clever legal jargon and legalese that is used to sort of sidestep some of these direct questions on that.
Yeah.
And it is weird. I think the bigger reveal would be, there's nuts and bolts. There is technology. It's been recovered. But there's also this other layer of consciousness that we've been able to basically drill down on. And this technology somehow interacts with it. Mm-hmm. That's a huge...
Or this technology generates the physical objects. I have been thinking over the last block of time a lot about, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Flatland. It's like an animated, it's based on
I've read the book.
The book. Well, the book is better.
It's cool.
1884, right? This guy published this book about this world where it's all two-dimensional and people started having to interact with three-dimensional, objects, and it's super clever. I know it's been done a couple different ways. I really like the animated 2000s. It's like 34 minutes, and it's
I've never seen the anime. I've read the book, and then Carl Sagan did a walkthrough on Cosmos about it.
It has got to be one of the most important things to how my perspective on this has shaped, and thinking about physical objects being sort of existing in our space. The example that I often give is like, I could sit on the roof of my house with a laser pointer, a nice strong laser pointer. I could move it to one end of my town if I had an unobstructed view down the street. And with a flick of my wrist, that two-dimensional object on the ground, bang, is at the other end of town. If that were a two-dimensional space and there were sort of beings living in it, they would have to come to terms with what the hell was that? And they might have people at conferences explaining in incredible detail, how many kilowatts of energy would be required to have a thing move at Mach 5, all these kind of detailed calculations, when really I'm sitting on the roof with my laser pointer. I burned like 3 calories just going boom, just like this, right? Because I'm in a different dimensional frame. So if that were able to happen, if something like that were able to happen into our space, which is a largely 3D space from a higher dimensional space, the projection that you would be having run down your street would be a 3D object and might be persistent after, the laser pointer went away. And maybe you could send out a team and collect that thing. And maybe you could put it in a hangar, and maybe, Lukatsky could drill a hole into it and stand inside. And as he says, it's all just surfaces. Yeah, it's all flat. It's all it's like a jet airplane. It's like your kid having a model of a jet airplane and running around the backyard with it and dropping it. And then a crash retrieval team coming in and picking up the model of the jet airplane. Yeah. And then spending 80 years going like, we can't figure out how this works. It's like, you're nuts. It's like, it's a husk, This is just spitballing, but there's lots of reasons to think that there can be physical craft and there can be this outside influence.
I feel like the more time goes on, the more that does feel like the right fit. It's hard. I don't really expect to solve it. I don't expect any of us are going to solve this mystery in our lifetime. Probably, it's fun to try. Well, let's back up a little bit. Because we haven't even touched on the real thing yet.
Yeah.
For people who don't know you and don't know your history, walk me through, how did you get involved in remote viewing, and what is your background?
Okay, so believe it or not, an important part of my background, I guess, is that I was raised super religious, fundamentalist Christian Pentecostal, if that particular branch of things. I think in the States, it's Assemblies of God. And so I had this deep experience with altered states on an ongoing basis all the time. It's just like part of the territory.
Can you explain that, like how, for people who aren't familiar with?
So it's a branch of Christianity that really leans into these kind of intense emotional experiences and, sort of divine flashy stuff and the speaking in tongues and the belief in like healing and supernatural like information coming to a person that they couldn't possibly know so that they can share with someone in a sort of,
So would that be the same thing as channeling or considered something?
They wouldn't think so. So this is an interesting thing about those kind of movements. If it's happening in a church context or, with our people, it's a spiritual gift. It's as soon as it's happening down the street by somebody who doesn't ascribe to our, list, oh, well, it's clearly demonic. And I didn't, that's exactly what I thought growing up in that. And I got way, way, way in there. I got a degree in theology and started working as a pastor and was headed for that sort of path, and then had some, fast forwarding a lot, had some significant shifts and completely stepped outside of that and decided that I was going to be a fine, materialist atheist for the rest of my days, and good to go. Was
that a period of time where that process of kind of mindset change took place, or did that happen kind of after? Was there an incident that precipitated that?
There was a whole series of points throughout my seminary education where I started questioning this, and it didn't all fall apart for me at that point. And I should say, I'm not criticizing people's belief. I'm just describing kind of
this is your journey.
This is what happened. Yeah. But there was a lot of these things, and I like to say that I kept kind of putting them up on a shelf. I'm like, okay, I can deal with that. By the time I got to the end and had to have like formal interviews to assess whether I was sort of doctrinally solid to receive credentials and so on, I had sort of sorted it all out in my head, and I figured, I had it all good. And then, as happens with a lot of people, some major life event comes along that just shakes everything up. And in my case, it was that my dad died very young after a sort of protracted cancer sickness. And that's not a reason to leave a religion. People die, all that kind of thing. But what happened was it shook the tree, or it shook things enough that all of this stuff that I had put up on this shelf that I had sorted out, my concerns with what I believed, basically fell off and hit me in the head. And I realized I need to sort of fundamentally reassess everything and be willing to go where it makes sense to me. I need things to make sense to me. And by the time I had done that, for me, there wasn't a lot left. And it was shocking. People talk about ontological shock in the UFO space, but that was sort of my first experience of ontological shock, was sort of finally getting up one day and saying, wow, I actually do not know sort of the permanent ongoing plan of the universe. Yesterday, I could have told you exactly how it was all going to play out, and I was on the right side, and we had it all figured out. Then it's sort of like you're starting from scratch and you have no idea what's going on. So that was rough.
How old were you when you made that adjustment?
That happened. So I was born in 1971. That happened in, I would say 90. So I was like 26 by the time that all sort of shook out.
Where did that take you next when you started to rebuild your sort of worldview after that?
Well, I stepped out of that and I just kind of decided, all of this was clearly, nonsense, and this sort of materialist scientific approach is what I need to do. And I started re-educating myself basically about basic things like human evolution or, sort of biology that previously had been, we were always sort of, had this sort of tentative, well, we don't think that's how it worked out and stuff like that. And I started to realize, no, there's like super clear, super obvious cause and effect. These things can just sort of be largely demonstrated. So this was all just astonishing and very exciting time. And then one day I'm minding my own business at home and I flip on the TV, and Dale Graff, who later would turn out to be a good friend and was the director of the Stargate program at one point, is on there doing his book tour on the news, on the Canadian news. I just about fell off of my chair because this actually drew a straight line back to a particular wild itinerant preacher who had come to our church camp in the summer one year, and for a week just regaled us with these absolutely batshit crazy stories of, he had information that out on the West Coast, there was a think tank, SRI, where people were basically in league with the devil. And we're doing a thing he called psychotronics. Now, this was in the mid-80s, maybe a little bit into the second half of the 80s. So this was that they were doing work at SRI was not secret.
The period of time where he said this was happening was the mid to late 80s?
When he was telling us about it, yeah.
When he was telling you guys. Okay.
Yeah, so at that point, I mean, Targ and Puthoff were publishing papers and they were doing all that sort of thing. And it was not a secret that they were doing research, but it was a secret that the U.S. government was paying for it and that there was a classified program. And this guy was just telling us this stuff based on a source that he had. When I left all this churchy stuff behind, I assumed that that was just one of those crazy stories, because there's a lot of them that you hear, growing up in those kind of things. So to discover that there was a guy on TV basically confirming that they, minus them being in league with the devil, obviously, confirming that this had been going on out there was shocking, completely shocking. And I just decided I had to find out what the hell this was. And so this is like the late 90s. So, the internet was not quite the place that it is now.
So I think it was better in a lot of ways back then.
Yeah. There was a one of these email distribution lists, which for the kids is like you've got a server, in this case Yahoo, which maybe people don't even know what Yahoo is anymore, but it was kind of a search engine at the time. But they ran other things. They had a server that you'd sign up, you'd say, I'm interested in remote viewing. And there was a server called Stargate that they had tucked in there. And I don't know, there's a few hundred people that were interested in that at the time. And people would send stuff to it by email, just a straight email. And everybody on the list would receive that email all at once. And people are having conversations, quoting each other, and the threads are getting more and more confusing. And that's how these early communities tended to work, is these kind of discussions. And so I started to learn about what this thing was that they allegedly had been researching.
Interesting to point out, just a little bit of context for our younger viewers and listeners, because I remember this time well. At that time, there weren't very many people on the internet. I mean, there were a lot, but there weren't nearly. It wasn't like it is today. So the people that were on really wanted to be there. There was like a real, there was a palpable interest in everything.
Yeah.
I think.
And it was small enough that you could have access to people in a way that you definitely wouldn't now.
Right.
Like, yeah. Just
the groups were much smaller and it was much more intimate in terms of compared to today where it's just millions of people.
Yeah. And these people, like, the sort of celebrities of whatever field, they're just getting used to the concept of email. And so, like, you email them, they're like, well, I'm going to answer this email. And that's not, how it works anymore. You can't just email your favorite celebrity and they just answer you because it's cool. That's that's not how it works. So, but one of the early things that was going on there was that people are just discussing it. A number of the viewers from the government sponsored program were actually a part of the forum. There were people, it's very smoky and confusing at that point. There were people who were claiming that they were part of various programs. Some of them, correctly. Some of them, it turns out, probably not. But one guy who claimed to be part of a Western European's intelligence service that used remote viewing, which I have some doubts about now, but I have no idea, said he was running a little contest and he would do this monthly. And he was selling tapes explaining how to do remote viewing and so on. But he also would run this contest monthly and he would put up one of those in the email. He would put up one of those magic eye images that you stare at. And also, so you would tell him what was in the magic eye and then there'd be a remote viewing target that you would try to do as well. And then every month he would pick someone who had responded and they would get a free set of these tapes. So I thought, well, this sounds fantastic. So I, unfortunately, in my entire life, have never successful been able to do a magic eye.
I've never either. I've never done one.
I had, when I was a kid, a corrective surgery for a strabismus, where the eye is kind of looking off somewhere else. And I don't know if that, but I couldn't do it. So I emailed him and I said, all right, I can't do magic eye. Hope I can still submit my thing. Here's my remote viewing session. And at the end of the month, he was like, yeah, you won. And I was like, all right, here we go. All we need is your credit card.
Yeah.
And I, on my lunch break, went and phoned him on a payphone. This is like historical recounting day and chatted with him for a while. And no, he didn't want my credit card. He didn't want anything. He just needed to know where to send the tapes. So I gave him my information and I got the tapes and I started to play with the tapes. And it was a very different technique than any of what is talked about mostly in the RV community now. It sort of involved almost like a hypnotic induction and a lot of visualization and moving through these kind of talked through guided sessions and stuff like that. And I did well. And it's such a confusing thing because it just didn't seem possible. So somebody would put up a target on the list and they would say, we're not going to tell you what this is. And I would go off and I would do my thing and I would come back and I would say, it's three chickens in a Corvette or whatever. And they would say, it is 3 chickens in a Corvette. And I would be like, oh my God. And then after doing this for some time, I started to get to the point of thinking, wait a minute, who says it's 3 chickens in a Corvette? Like, am I just being set up with whatever I say you're going to say it is? And so then I started getting into the flip side of it where you set up the target. I would pick what the target was. I would control who knew and didn't know what the target was. And other people would say, oh, I'll work on that target. And that started working where people were describing the exact thing more or less that I had secretly kind of written on an index card and put in my desk at home. Yeah. That gets harder to explain. It gets weirder and weirder. And I started to think like one of two things is happening here. And these are people from all different countries because we're on the internet at this point. And I got to the point of thinking like one of two things is going on here. Like either there's some international conspiracy of all these people, just deliberately their entire goal is just to confuse me. And they're breaking into my house at night and finding the index card and radioing back to, either that's going on or maybe it just works. And after a while, I was like, I think it's easier to just not be a crazy person who thinks that they're being stalked by an international conspiracy and just say, this is what it appears to be.
Wow.
And it was.
So you had a double whammy ontological shock. You had to detach from a whole worldview, and then you had to kind of like find your way into this new thing and understand that it works. And that probably took some time. Is there just going back a little bit, when you sort of broke up with formal religion, if I can put it in those terms, was there a period of time where you were just kind of listless and depressed, or what did it feel liberating, or what did that, emotionally, what was that like, that period?
It felt hugely liberating. And also, I think as a lot of people who go through that, I was also very angry because there's this sense in which you're just like, you can't believe that you thought certain things and that people that you trusted encouraged you to think certain things and things like that. And so there's this angry stage. And I don't think some people ever get out of that when they've had a worldview shift like that.
Yeah.
I've now, and this is a much longer arc of story, but I've now gotten back to the point where although I don't worry in the least about the things that I was taught around that time, I've sort of circled back around to probably half of the concepts that I was working with at the time broadly are probably correct. That took a long time to kind of come back to some basic, certainly not religious, but spiritual sense of certain things and about reality being larger and about our obligation to each other.
You're talking about things that you had been taught in your religious education that turned out to be true, but in a different context than you were originally.
Yeah.
I see.
I think that in a lot of cases, people have historically, have had lots of extraordinary experiences. I think some of them have been with NHI. I think some of them have been with all sorts of different things. And they, have done their best to try to put it together into something that they can pass on to their kids. And that's just sort of over time accreted more and more extras. And all of a sudden you got these dogmatic things. And I think at the core, there was probably, honest experiences that happened that, more simply put, would just encourage not being an asshole and, trying to look out for people and, not dropping bombs on people you disagree with necessarily for certain reasons.
The basics.
Like that. The basics, I've totally sworn off of dropping bombs on people.
Me too. I gave it up.
Also can't afford it. It's like
prohibitively expensive.
It really is.
It's funny how this conversation, like with Diana Pasulka recently, it's come back around to a religious context just in the last few years, and other people have kind of mentioned it as well. But I think a lot about how, at a fundamental level, almost all religions, we're talking about a hierarchy of beings of some kind. We're talking about a veil between worlds, an information transfer between layers of reality. And it's like the more you zoom out from it, the more it really does fit the description of a simulation. It's really the lens you want to look at it through. I mean, do you want to, give it a religious, framework and sort of put it in that context? That's one way to do it. Another way is to step out of it and try to suss it out. And this seems like a really interesting transition period for you as you're stepping into this new world. So where do you go from here? Actually, real quick, a quick question. Now, knowing what you know, how good were those tapes that you got at the time?
Well, so
if you had to review them today,
they're a completely different type of remote viewing, given that it's this kind of guided, imagery sort of thing. But a way of, I guess, sort of suggesting how good they were at the time would be the story that I decided that I was going to try to use them to win the lottery. Of course, this is the immediate thing that anybody decides to do with psychic functioning.
If it works,
you should be able to do this thing.
And it's the first thing every debunker wants to ask. Well, then why don't you play the lottery?
Why don't you play the lottery? So, and I didn't know a lot about remote viewing at the time, but I knew that there was this problem with doing numbers. Numbers and letters are very difficult to do. And that's actually true. There's entire branches of remote viewing practice that are around like trying to do an end run around the fact that the brain just doesn't like to pick up on that data. So I invented what I thought was my own very clever idea, which just turned out to be something that Puthoff and Targ had done in the 70s, which was to take numbers and associate them with pictures and say, okay, I'm going to play the pick 3. And I know that, there's going to be three digits that are going to be picked. I can't tell you what they are psychically because you can't do numbers very well, but I can have a pool of 10 pictures over here, and another pool of 10 pictures, and another pool of 10 pictures. And I can do 3 remote viewing sessions and see, do I find a picture that basically is going to describe what the number will be tomorrow if I have myself shown that feedback. I had never really bought lottery tickets in my life because the above religious angle, like that's very bad. You don't do that. So I think this was the 5th time I had ever bought a lottery ticket at all at this point in 98. And on the 3rd time that I tried to do this with these tapes, I nailed it in one shot, one ticket. And because I knew that I was going to probably tell this story, I brought my little, $500. And basically there were three drawings. Here's some weird pillars. Digit 1 turned out to be associated with this trumpet, which not a really great match, but it matches the valves, in the middle. There was digit 2, which was this just kind of weird thing with, concentric, squarey whatevers and some angled stuff. There turned out to be a picture of a grill in the 10. And there's another one that had some kind of scales on it and the concept of like a child would like this thing. And it turned out to be a pine cone. And I bought one ticket based on just that information. And it was 1,000 to 1 shot, which doesn't mean my whole worldview has to change, but damn.
1,000 to 1.
I was sitting at work the next morning checking it online and saw that. And I just thought to myself, I guess this is what I do now. Like this will be my job. Like
that's awesome.
You can, and then spent the next year or 2 basically working my way through all that money trying to replicate it and not having a very good time.
Spend $1,500 trying to
probably.
It's like gardening. It's like you spend
house wins.
You spend $500 to save $3 on tomatoes.
Yeah,
this is my wife's joke about whenever we try to garden. So you created a chart of pictures that correlated with numbers, and then you were able to basically sidestep the number issue by just focusing in on
which I thought was my clever invention and turns out to have been accomplished like probably around when I was born.
I think I heard Hal Puthoff say, I could be getting this wrong here, but correct me if you know differently. But I think I've heard him say when he was asked if they could do this, he played the stock market. And somebody was like, well, why didn't you keep doing it? And he's like, well, I did keep doing it. We made a lot of money and then it got boring. I didn't need the money. I'm good.
Yeah, they did a whole little project where I think it was his kid's school was doing a fundraiser. It was like a privately run school, and they were doing a fundraiser. And he said, well, we kind of do this thing in our lab. We could run some experiments and then basically donate the proceeds. And they basically traded on the silvers market for a month for silvers futures, I guess. And I can't remember how many, 100 and something thousand. It was insane. They had a series of trials where literally every single one was a hit.
Wow.
Him and Targ.
Yeah. And he talked about it like he was bored with it after a while, which is funny because that's how Ingo talked about some of the RV stuff. He's like, it just got so repetitive. It's not, I don't know. It was a job.
It's amazing what you could get used to.
Yeah.
And bored with. Yeah. Bored with successfully picking stocks. I think would take me a little longer. But
I could do it for a while.
Yeah. Yeah. I could figure out a way.
Give me a few years. So tell me, what's the next step for you? You find out this is something that you can do, and you're kind of awestruck by this realization. What's the next step, and how do you get to the IRVA?
Yeah. So the initial next step was that I'm really doubling down on spending time in this Yahoo email thing and talking to everybody and absorbing everything and finding stuff off the websites and reading about it, to the extent that a few of the people thought, okay, maybe he sort of knows what he's talking about. And Angela Thompson-Smith, who was the moderator of that distribution list, which was not a fun job at the time, because you've got all these flame wars going on between people.
It's like Reddit over email. If there was no message thread, it just Reddit happening with emails.
Yeah, and people just, I think she was tired of doing it and said, "Is anybody interested in doing this?" And said, "Are you interested in doing this?" And I said, "I'll do this," because I just at this point didn't know. I just thought everything I did would be great, it's in that sort of. And so I wound up moderating this list for, I don't know, a couple of years. In that process, get to know a lot of people in the community online. Some of that involved communicating directly with some of these people that had been in the program. And that was weird. So this is like 98 and 99. I'm having this opportunity to talk to people that were there. And
any names that would jump to mind for people?
Well, Paul Smith was on there then. Lynn Buchanan was on there for a time. Not everybody wanted to stay on there because it really got toxic. I don't know if
Lynn's like a superstar.
Yeah, Lynn's a superstar. Joe wasn't on there, Joe McMoneagle, but when I needed to clarify certain things, I could just email him and he would answer. There were people on there who worked in the program who were working under, they were on the list, I think, under pseudonyms, but everybody was vouching for them who you would know. Yeah. And I still don't know who some of those folks were. So it was, and then you'd have people on there who were part of this kind of new RV set of people, sort of post 1995. That were taking it and running with it to do things. And one of those was a lady named Bevy Jaggers, who was running a organization called the US Psi Squad, which always made me chuckle. Sounds awesome, sounds comic booky. And after a while, I got to know her and she asked me if I would participate in their squad. And I was pretty much like, well, this is what I do now. I mean, there's no money in it, but this is
But you were in the right place at the right time as the internet is just shifting. This whole world, this whole community is coming together and coalescing. Yeah. Here you are. You're what, like 30? Yeah, you're probably. Yeah, you're right in the groove. So cool. Yeah. What a cool time to be there and talking to all these people. And then started getting to do with them, despite the fact that I'm only 2 years into RV, getting to work with them on operational projects that were important and meaningful. And Lynn Buchanan, for people, he's one step removed from Hal and Russell, right? Like he's one of that first group that came out of that SR group?
So like Lynn and Paul and some of those guys were trained by Ingo, and it gets a little like at the beginning, it really was just sort of Russell and and Hal, and a small group of people that didn't really go on, like Pat Price, because he died, Hella Hamid, different very people that were working at SRI. And then later the iteration was when they started to operationalize it, they would send people out to SRI for training. And also Ingo had by that point started to develop a methodology.
I want to come back to the lineage of the history of the different schools of thought around remote viewing in a moment, but I want to finish this thread with your own experience. So you're in this group, you're having the Psi Squad.
Yeah.
What happens next?
We did stuff that was really important and meaningful. We had a significant project around the Kursk submarine disaster in
I remember this
2000.
Yeah.
I had particularly good sessions around that, which are honestly a little traumatizing. It's a thing. I guess we can get into it at some point, that sometimes remote viewing involves experiencing, if you're not careful, where you're at or what's going on. And being in that sub was not a nice place to be for somebody 2 years into this.
Yeah. But for people who don't remember, the Kursk was a Russian nuclear submarine that went down and was lost for a period of, I think it was days underwater. They were stranded.
Yeah.
And there was an attempt to try and rescue them. And this was a huge global news story, but these guys were basically just stuck in this sub at the bottom of the ocean, right?
Yeah. And Bevy Jaggers, who ran the group, had contacts in both the FBI and CIA and was passing this information up that we were producing. The concern was, if there's people still alive, try to get that information to somebody. For a period of time, there were people alive, but then not. So that was wild. We did another high profile project, which I'm not completely sure how public it is. So I'll keep it as a high profile missing person case in a metropolitan city in the summer of 2001. Super high profile. It turned out that this person had been murdered, not clear on the circumstances. There were some valuable lessons that came out of that for me about how RV works, which at some point maybe we can go into, because I think it gets to the heart of some of the concerns that I have that I spoke to you about before we, hit record, about how RV may be being misunderstood in some of its application these days, particularly with UFOs, but about basically anything where it's difficult to get confirmation of what has happened and where teams of people are deployed in an RV sense against a thing. Short version of that one is that a group of people were RVing, all trying to locate this person. There developed a very clear consensus among the group pointing to a particular location in the metropolitan center. And then there was me off in this park insisting that no, it's this park, like clear on the other side of the city. And it turned out later they didn't find this person, I don't think, for more than a year, which was really unfortunate. It turned out because the police had botched the search, and the area that they had thought that they had cleared had not been cleared, and this person was in a park in the middle of a metropolitan city for long enough that that's not good. And so the point of that is not to say that, gee, look at me getting this right. It's that in a group dynamic, you can have people blindly, we haven't even talked about protocols yet, to blindly work a remote viewing target, which is the standard, if you're going to call it remote viewing. You can nevertheless find agreement that develops across a team about the nature of a thing that turns out not to be the case.
So in other words, multiple different remote viewers like seeing the same thing, reporting they're seeing the same thing is not necessarily the statistical home run.
Not necessarily.
That we want or sometimes think it might be.
And you would think that it would be, given this sort of, excitement around, they did it blind.
What are the odds that 3 people could all see the same thing?
Or more than that in that case. Yeah. Like I think we had probably like 5 or 6 or 7. And sometimes that can just happen. There's a lot of reasons that we can dig into, I suppose. And then the absolutely strangest thing that we did was right after 9/11, everybody wanted to know where Osama bin Laden was. We did workups on that were.
I think you can tell us where he was. Where was? I think you're safe now.
Yeah,
they got him.
They got him. I don't know where he was then. Right then. Because what I was trying to do at the time was I picked a date like 2 weeks into the future and say, where is he going to be? Because I figured it's not of any help to, SEAL Team 6 to know where he is now. And then that takes a week to get to somebody. And then they're like, well, that's where he was. That's not. So I thought, oh, well, all you have to do is like pick a time in 2 weeks in the future and do that. So the location that I came up with during one of those sessions turned out to be within 100 kilometers of where he eventually was killed. I don't know if that means that he was there that early, but it's completely in a different country.
Plausible.
It's possible that he was already there. I know that there's some speculation that he was there with the knowledge of the Pakistani intelligence service and all of those kind of things that people talk about with in this town called Abbottabad. But it didn't make a lot of sense at the time. Why would he be in Pakistan? That didn't make a whole lot of sense, but we
sent 100,000 troops to Afghanistan. He's supposed to be there.
Yeah.
What happened?
Yeah. And Iraq,
And Iraq,
close enough, So, I don't know what to make of that. It's super weird, but
it is super weird.
Yeah.
So you're in it now. You're doing this. You're finding yourself in these kind of scenarios where you're looking at these cases. The RV is working, but probably a little bit in unexpected ways. It sounds like. I mean, you're learning about it as you're going,
and a lot of failed sessions in there. Like I don't want this is the hits. This is not the success rate of RV, which is maybe something we should talk about, is a lot lower than people think. Like world-class remote viewers doing 60 to 7% of the time hitting and getting enough information that it's very clearly a hit is about talk to different people and they're kind of sliding that range around a little bit, but that's roughly what we're talking about. So
we're talking about the top remote viewers maybe have a 50 to 70% hit rate somewhere in there.
Yeah.
These are like the Michael Jordans of remote viewing, the top people.
Yeah.
Are we talking about dozens or hundreds or thousands of people potentially, or?
I don't know how many people kind of could get to that. Like world class, there is sort of, it's a little bit like learning to play the violin, I think. If you practice enough, you're going to be able to play passably. You're probably not going to Carnegie Hall unless you're sort of born with a certain innate, music. You might be able to practice enough to get there, but there is a little bit of innate stuff and a little bit of practice stuff. So I think a lot of people could do extremely well. I think most people, I haven't met too many people that couldn't do this at all.
I guess that comes to a fundamental sort of question that I want to get to in a little bit about because we had talked earlier about the UFO connection and some of the things that have just happened recently.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering to what extent this is an ability that is available to everyone because of just the nature of the way information works and consciousness works. Yeah. And to what extent genetics plays a role. Like you said, you're born with it. Maybe you have a certain proclivity for it or a talent. Let's go back to how remote viewing actually works. I mean, explain that to people who don't understand. I mean, we've heard this term. We understand more or less what it means, but what does it really mean?
So the Defense Intelligence Agency's RV manual that they put out in the mid 80s that Paul Smith wrote for them has this definition at the beginning, which I will just read to make sure I get it right. So the acquisition and description by mental means of information blocked from ordinary perception by distance, shielding, or time. That's what they threw in. Experimentally, when they're trying to figure out what this is at SRI, and they're doing it in response to believing that the Soviets have an advanced program that they're doing something over there and we better get our act together. It was a little bit more fleshed out, what we're going to basically try to do this under lab controls. We need to first off understand, is it even true? Is this just a psyop that the Soviets are doing to make us think that they can see into our, bedrooms and actually, there's nothing. So they first needed to figure out if it was true, and they needed to do the most rigid sort of lab controlled stuff that you would do. And so that is what SRI was good at. So protocols comes into it. And protocols is a word that gets misused in the RV community a lot a lot of people, when they say protocol, they're actually talking about a particular method. That Hawaiian one that I was talking about, extended remote viewing, there's different methods. When in fact, the protocol is super simple. Ingo, in a magazine article in 93, laid it out, what the protocol was, which I will just read this one too. So remote viewing is composed of a 5-part protocol. When any one of those 5 parts are omitted, such as confirmatory feedback, then what has taken place is something other than remote viewing. This is Fate magazine, 93, Sentinel of Truth, Fate magazine. But it was an interview, so he got...
And Ingo, for people who don't know who Ingo Swann is, he's probably the most famous of all time remote viewer there ever was, right? I mean, I'd say he's the granddaddy.
Yeah, he's the granddaddy. And he was a very, very skilled natural psychic, also a fantastic artist. And he, in getting pulled in, and funny, I never met Ingo. He passed in 2013, and I had not yet sort of cycled back into, there was a block of time when I was sort of out of being able to go to conferences, young kids and stuff like that. But so he was the guy. And what he tried to do for SRI and for that program was to come in and take what he knew about how his own psychic functioning worked and try to manualize it, try to figure out like, okay, so if you approach it like this is what's going to happen, and try to make it into something that would be transferable to other people by training. You could just get an army of natural psychics that you sort of recruited off the street, but apparently those people can be kind of wily and hard to manage. Whereas if you can develop sort of a transportable skill set that you can take somebody that you've already got in a military commission and say, okay, we can rely on, you do these steps, and so that the CRV methodology is sort of the genius of Ingo in sort of honestly reverse engineering his own psychic process. And it's super cool how it works and how it builds up from a vague idea, and you sort of coax this signal line, is how he referred to it, to the point that later you're getting all kinds of extraordinarily high level,
So Ingo, working with Hal and Russell at SRI, is in the very early days developing the methodology so that this could be trained to other military people, so that they could reach into their existing pool of talent and screen for people within the military services, and then bring them into this program and teach them this method.
Yeah.
And that was CRV.
The SRI stuff started with more natural psychics. Like Pat Price he had been the police commissioner of Burbank, I believe, at one point, and Ella Hammond was a photographer that Russ Targ knew. And at first they just brought in people who just kind of did a free-form thing. And it's important to note that is a totally legitimate way to do remote viewing, because they were working within, I guess we didn't even finish the protocol conversation, but if you're doing it within the correct protocol, you can call it remote viewing. And I guess I should say, you can call anything whatever you want, but if you want to use the definitions that were laid out then, and a lot of times I think nowadays when people talk about remote viewing, they're invoking that term to, sort of trade on the credibility that program had. And so I think if they're doing that now, they should probably pay attention to the definitions if they're going to sort of trade on that credibility. So Ingo said there was this 5-part thing, and some of it was just very simple, obvious, should be probably obvious stuff. One of them is that it be planned. These are not spontaneous events. It's a thing like, okay, you decide we're going to do this project, and we go and we do it. So it's planned. It's documented or recorded in some way. Pretty basic. There's some kind of technique, something that happens that's supposed to point people at something. Those are all pretty basic. And then the two that are sort of the most interesting are that it has to be blind. You are not to know what it is that you are going after. And that's a standard lab requirement for most types of research, like clinical research into new medications. The FDA and the regulatory agency in whatever country wants you to do a drug trial, double blind, with a placebo control, all these sorts of things. And blindness gets very confusing to people because people think that blindness means that you should be able to rely on what comes out the other end more.
Right.
I've heard this over and over, like, well, the viewers were blind And they came back with roughly what we expected them to when we pointed them at X. And because they were blind, that contributes to us just knowing that they're probably right. And that's the wrong way to think about it. Go back to the clinical trials analogy. The fact that a trial is done blind is just how you're supposed to do trials. It has nothing to do with whether the drug works. It's just like the rules of how you do research.
Right. So you can collect data that you can use. And
you can replicate and argue with people and say, well, it's not because of this and it's not because of this. And then the last thing is feedback. You're supposed to be able to have feedback. And that is probably one of the more misunderstood, between blindness and feedback, I think, are the most misunderstood elements of it and have led to the biggest problems that the field faces today and really comes into play when we start talking about the UFO overlap.
Well, let's dig into that for a second. Tell me about why is the blindness thing, why does that lead to problems? Because as we go further away from the CRV and the original group, right, we start to get into all these other different methods and schools of thought. So let's start there and then let's kind of progress through how these other lines of thinking developed. What can go wrong with the idea of, working blind and assuming a certain outcome is more or less accurate because of that, and the idea of how these targets are tasked, and where does the breakdown happen?
So I guess maybe a good way to start with that is to describe how a tasking happens. And so usually you'll see when somebody's doing a remote session these days, a kind of a number that's assigned to the target. It can be a completely random number. It doesn't have to mean anything. At the beginning of the project, way back, they started out using coordinates on the map because they thought that, okay, the person is going somewhere, and if we tell them where to go, they go there. And then at some point, somebody decided to try just using nonsense numbers, and it didn't change the fact that it worked. So that you have this number, that's kind of the targeting mechanism. And it's a thing that even though it's blind, so you've got the tasker, we'll call them, who sets up the target, assigns a number. That random number string is the only thing the viewer is given. There's no, we are looking at a kind of a thing like this. That's called front loading.
Is it written down, or is it just read off to you, or do you get a packet, or like, how does that usually work?
So that number would be, and we're going to sort of, I guess I'll describe it in sort of the old school terms of paper and pen, but of course you could do this by email, or you could do whatever you want. So that number is initially set. But then the other thing that the tasker does before they hand that over is they write out a targeting cue traditionally. And that will be, so like describe the exterior and the interior of this particular building located at XYZ on the 20th of November, describe the work being done at the location and, the focus of the work. That'll all be written down somewhere. And then just the random number though, or the filing number is given to the viewer who has no contact with the tasker. They're not allowed to be in the same room. They're not allowed to talk. And the viewer will just from that number start their process. And ideally, they are directed by this target cue, even though they're not exposed to it. Sounds crazy, but this is how it works. They find themselves sort of directed, and they collect information from their unconscious, and through whatever methodology, collect information and put together a report at the end of it all. And then feedback comes or doesn't. It should be possible to get feedback. There's a lot of times where we'll get into this with the UFO topic, but Ingo made a big point in that 93 article in Fate magazine about saying that confirmatory feedback is like important. And if you don't have it, remote viewing is not what happened. Like you may just be doing sparkling psi. It's not champagne. It's something.
Did he explain why it was so critical? Was there some aspect of getting confirmation, or one way or the other, that the information was correct or incorrect? That is it some kind of like, what am I trying to say here? Do you suspect that the reason the feedback might be so important is due more to the fundamental nature of what's going on under the hood of remote viewing? Like the tasker has to associate the imagery with the number in their own head.
That is certainly what they thought at first. I mean, one of the big researchers in the field is Dr. Edwin May. I think it's still true to say that he believes that the feedback and you're receiving it, what you're doing as a viewer is a precognition task.
Right.
Looking forward, closes the loop, and you get the thing back. And I believe that's still sort of his working model of what it is. There are others. And I'm sort of in other camps. We can get into that, but that's what's supposed to happen is you get the feedback, and particularly when they thought that it was strictly, when everybody agreed that it was strictly precognitive, or that is what maybe you were viewing was the target package feedback coming to you. That was considered really important. Also because at that early stages, they were still sort of doing this lab environment thing, and they're trying to collect information to indicate how good what they did was. And they're having to demonstrate to people up into the 3-letter agencies that the investment is worth pumping money into this project. I
saw a great interview with Russell Targ. I wonder if you're familiar with this, where he said that they would have these guys come in and they'd be like 2, 3 stars, 4-star guys, or they would come in sometimes and they would, instead of demonstrating it, they would have them do it.
Yeah.
They'd say, we'll get you sit down in the chair. We're going to have you do it. And then they would and then they would do it and it would work. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that gives you some insight into like the question of who can do it, because they would have like their CIA contract monitor come in, whose job was to make sure the money was being spent well. I know in one case that this person fundamentally didn't believe that what they were doing was worth anything. He was sure it was a scam. And Russell did this thing where it was like, one day they came into the lab and the guy said, "Where's the viewer?" And Russell said, "You're the viewer today." And they did what's called an outbounder protocol, and they had somebody leave the facility and go out. And then he just said, like, I don't believe this is possible. And they said, nevertheless, sit in the Faraday cage over there and just follow the steps. You'll get some surprising thoughts that come into your mind, write them down. And he was really good. And he hated that. And later, it got to the point where he was sure that they were like pumping sound in, or they were doing something to subliminally cue him. And there's a story where somebody basically finds him like in the remote viewing room, like all hunched over and writing and trying to hide it from the imaginary feedback cameras and all this kind of stuff. And eventually, once he was convinced, he actually, apparently, I don't know who this person actually is, the lore, because I don't know who his name is, but this person went on to actually be one of their good viewers.
Wow.
So
what an
you can remote view against your will almost, or against your better interests.
Well, let's walk me through this, because you've talked about some of the problems with working blind and working with different remote viewers who see the same thing and agree on it. Ingo Swann, as much as I think he's spectacular and I love this guy, but he wrote some pretty astonishing things.
Yes.
Like he said that he remote viewed people working underneath the surface of the moon, that there was activity there. Like, he's known for this. What's your take on that? Some of these more extraordinary things.
Partly because it's Ingo.
If it were anybody else, it would.
If it were anybody else right now, I would be like, that's interesting. We'll just set that over here. We don't really know. Maybe this is the time to get into. We don't know what happens when take remote viewing looking methodologies, and there's a lot of them. Like we started to talk about that. You've got CRV, ERV.
I could share the map. Well, actually, we could kind of.
Yeah, we could start talking through that.
Let me see if I can.
There's a lot of methods. Like we said,
I'll pull it up while you talk. Go ahead.
Yeah. So those are not the protocol. The protocol is the experimental controls. Like we said, one of my favorite Joe McMoneagle quotes is like, he has not a level of disdain, but a level of not concern about methodology. He very much believes that it's the protocol that makes it remote viewing, and that there's all sorts of ways you can do remote viewing. So he says, and I think it's one of my favorite Joe quotes, is that if you are following the protocol, so you've got the blindness, the feedback, you've got the controls for the lab, and your method is to stand on your head in a bowl of pea soup, whistling Dixie out of your left nostril while doing some session work on a piece of paper, he says that's remote viewing, because you're working within the protocol. He doesn't care how you do the thing. And so during the program, both at SRI and later, as part of the various iterations and eventually the Stargate program, you had people doing a lot of different things. There were people doing automatic writing. There were people doing tarot. There were people doing all kinds of stuff that we wouldn't think right now, looking at these charts and stuff necessarily as being remote viewing, but they were doing it within the protocol, and it's remote viewing.
So it's this fundamental ability that is available to almost everyone, seemingly.
Yeah.
And throughout the history of humanity, we've developed these techniques and strategies and little ways of culturally to kind of access this ability. But there, up until SRI, there was no, or at least up until the Soviets, I guess, started doing whatever they were doing, there was no real formal way to teach it or learn it. I guess you had to find somebody, and then you just had to kind of figure it out.
Traditional ways, or shaman, or
I'm curious because as we get into this map here, before we do, you were talking about being involved in this mail server group on in the 90s, in the mid to late 1990s. This is shortly after the Soviet Union collapsed in 1989, 1990. Did you, in that group and your interactions with them, ever learn anything about what the Soviets were up to? Was there any, when that information came out, did any of that make its way?
Yeah. So what had happened initially was that a book called, I believe, Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain, or something like, I'm going to mess that title up, but
write this down.
Had been written about Soviet parapsychology. And it started being passed around, I guess, in intelligence circles and in military circles. And the right people got shown it, and they were like, if this is what they're doing, we're in trouble. And so they basically commissioned a study, and you can download it. It's in the declassified, documents that are out there, called USSR Offensive. Well, that's it. Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain. Yeah, and then the report was called basically Offensive Capabilities USSR Parapsychology. I really should have written that down, but that's a Defense Intelligence Agency report talking about all the different stuff that was going on there. They use the term psychotronics a lot. They use this kind of projected psychic offensive capability, which gets us into a weird space where, assuming that the IRV program was completely shut down in 95, they didn't ask me. We went from a Defense Intelligence Agency document talking about controlled offensive psychic capability, and supposedly our ultimate response was, yeah, well, we can look at stuff really good, like with remote viewing. I don't know if that's a logical arc of response, on the part of the intelligence community. And so when we hear about the program potentially continuing and different people, now starting to talk about more remote influencing type capability and this stuff to do with what ultimately seems to turn into CE5 type stuff, it feels, no comment on whether it's true or not, but it feels like a more logical progression into kind of a two-way psychic process.
Let's look at this map here and see if you can explain to us a little bit about what's going on here. This is sort of the path of evolution of remote viewing methods, would you say?
Yeah. This is something that was put together by Daz Smith, who's an RV expert in the UK.
And this is his website, Remote Viewed.
Yeah. Tons of resources on this site. Like half of the documents that we've been talking about, you'll be able to find and download from there. We don't agree on everything, but Daz is like a stand-up guy who is absolutely doing excellent work and really digging into the history in a way that is sometimes uncomfortable for some of the people that were part of the programs, we'll say.
How is that? So, how so?
Well, there tend to be debates about, what sort of had legitimacy, what didn't have legitimacy, and who did and who didn't. So sometimes people, I think, have felt that, some of this isn't exactly right. But sometimes that's okay because you wouldn't want everybody to agree that, there's a lot of different interests
This is just Daz Smith's attempt to try and map out the relationships between these different techniques and methods over time, so that people can visualize what.
And he's been involved since those very earliest, 90s internet days as well.
Because I think it's important for people to understand that not only is there an abundant information on remote viewing that's on official government websites up to and including the CIA's sanitized reading room, but it's still there. I mean, you can find this stuff, but this is a very dynamic space. There's a lot going on.
And this page in particular that you've got up now is just this is all the different methodologies that have flown and the people that have sort of come out of.
So in our audience, like Bertie Jaworski's been on a couple of times, and she's great. Transdimensional mapping is familiar to a lot of our folks, and then Courtney Brown I interviewed a little while ago, and he's got the Farsight group and his whole approach. So let's take us through the evolution, if you can, and just kind of explain where these differences of approach originate.
Yeah. So if you go up to not that far up, but if you kind of go down to where you get the bigger diagram starting.
Let's see right
around here. So in most people's, there's a lot of pre stuff, but in most people's minds, this is where you would want to jump in with that military CRV kind of spot there. So this is essentially going to be what was trained as part of these official programs. We'll say that basically all of these are trying to. All of these bubbles are saying that they're using the protocol correctly. There are debates about that understanding in certain areas of the map here, but these are beyond the protocols. These are like individual methodologies. So we don't have a circle on here for standing on your head in a bowl of pea soup, as Joe said, but in theory, that's on here. So the military CRV is kind of what was officially taught. You can download the Defense Intelligence Agency manual that Paul Smith wrote for them, and which different people still train today, including Paul. And that is sort of that core thing is sort of the result of Ingo's reverse engineered. What is it that is happening when I do psychic things?
And by the way, I'd like to point out the first time you and I spoke, our original call, you made a really great point here about this. You and I'm going to paraphrase it a little bit, but you were basically saying that because Ingo was able to create a system out of it, doesn't mean that system accounts for everything that's really going on when Ingo's doing it. Like, it's such an intuitive, organic process for him.
Yeah.
You were trying to say basically that there really is stuff that gets lost in translation. This was more of a convenience thing for the people who wanted to teach it than it was for being effective, right?
Yeah, it's important. It's important to know that the military and the intelligence community did not invent psi. Right. Did not invent this. This is a faculty that kind of comes along with consciousness and always has. And you can just see throughout history, and yes, through religion and all sorts of different kind of other contexts, this ability sometimes either mythologized or demonstrated in a more controlled way at times. I think one of the first Stephen Schwartz often talks about the first remote viewing on record ever was, and I will absolutely butcher this, but basically we're talking about the ancient world, and there's a king who is trying to figure out, he wants to know stuff about enemy troop movements and so on. And he has all his seers that he brings in, and everybody says, oh, I can do it. And he says, well, this is what we're going to do. We're going to basically set up a test. And he basically set up the first controlled remote viewing experiment without those words. He said, I'm going to do a thing on a particular day, and you're going to tell me what it is that you did. And he basically did something completely bizarre. Like, I think he boiled a turtle in a brass pot over a particular fire, and, super specific thing. And then had all these advisors kind of tasked in a remote viewing sense to describe it. And one person could to great degree. I don't think things went well for the other guys.
They got boiled.
But this is a thing that's been around forever. Here, they are trying to make it into a product is the wrong word, but they're trying to make it into a thing that can be basically handed to people, and they can follow the steps, and they can get better at it over time.
And trying to write the textbook, sort of like what?
Yeah,
in a sense.
Yeah. And it flows. They all share in common that they sort of you initially, by some means, have a sort of an initial glancing connection to the target. In a lot of people's RV, that's fairly closely derivative from CRV. You'll see them do these squiggles at the beginning, which is this kind of moment of just letting your autonomic system kind of say, yeah, that's what it is, just kind of, squiggle it. And then you don't jump straight from that to, there's a processor that runs at 13 gigahertz. That's, you don't jump straight to high level information. You slowly build up this connection to the target. They talk about it in terms of a camera aperture as an analogy. So they talk about this aperture sort of opening. So in a photography sense, if the aperture is really, really tight and you're hardly getting anything through, you got to have specialized conditions to be able to get much of anything, but you're going to get grainy. It's really difficult if you don't have the right amount of data flow coming through, and that you can't just open the aperture. You have to slowly open it. And in CRV, there were sort of steps that you would go through that would coax your unconscious process to start bubbling up information to you. There would be sort of markers that would happen along the way where, well, then this sort of thing will happen in your experience. And that's how okay, now we're moving into the next stage. And eventually it opens to the point where you are having significant experience of the target and receiving detailed, potentially, data, from the target. It's interesting,
the aperture analogy, because I know Daz is a photographer. Yep. I'm a photographer too. So he and I, when I spoke with him, we kind of connected on that. We both shoot Fuji, and and Ingo was an artist, a painter, as you pointed out. And a lot of these folks are artistically inclined. And it seems like there's an inherent sort of, I don't know if conflict is the right word, but friction between the way that an artist, creative person sort of thinks and behaves and the way that the military wants to sort of, regiment and institutionalize the training. And I feel like there's probably some things that do get lost in translation just because you can't.
Yeah. And so this is helpful these methods are helpful, and they always were helpful in being able to have a group of people just kind of dropped into it. But there is stuff that is outside of this.
So you've got the military CRV. This is the core.
Yeah.
Right. And then this branches off into Ed Dames and Paul H. Smith.
Yeah.
And then I can see down here Courtney Brown and the SRV. Yeah. TDS is Prudence Calabrese, who is now known as Birdie.
Yeah.
Who I guess she went through an evolution in her approach over time, and then developed a new technique. And so, it really branches off into all of these different, there's Daz with the flow.
Yeah. And this kind of branching right at the beginning is basically like there was a kind of a core method that they used in the program. Unless people were doing what's called extended remote viewing, or they were doing one of the more unusual methods. There was a sort of a core CRV, they would have called it, thing. And then when the program was shut down, and all these people were kind of boom into the public sector, and it was not just shut down, it was declassified. They wanted to share. And so they started to share, and each of them kind of had their own take on what they had learned and on the limitations or the opportunities. Some of them very much tried to, Paul Smith, for example, very, very stringently tries to stick to the way Ingo taught that group, to a degree that, I did some training with him, and it can be painful because Ingo's approach was very much, we're going to get this into you. And, Others, arguably would think that they were doing the same thing, but some people are doing it, more closely to Ingo's standard than others. But as we said, Ingo's standard and that kind of initial thing is not the be all end all either. So you start to have people after 95 kind of doing their own thing. Ed Dames was part of the program. Lynn Buchanan was part of the program. You see names like that around here. And then you get their students. You get this next generation. So Courtney basically learned from Ed. Okay. Looking at this diagram. So SRV, scientific remote viewing, is a kind of an offshoot, genealogically or whatever, from technical remote viewing, TRV, which is what Ed came out with at the beginning. CRV with Lynn Buchanan is also quite close to what originally would have been taught by Ingo, with some, modifications of terminology, stuff like that.
So like any art form, you have like the initial sort of school, and then you have these people who sort of modify it and enhance it and apply different techniques, and they develop their own way. Just looking at this chart here, I need to ask you, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but we've talked about this before. Some of the names on this list, they are known for saying some pretty amazing things, and I think we can Google around and find what those are. I remember Ed Dames talking about all kinds of stuff that was supposed to happen and things. We've touched on sometimes how there are problems with what people see and how that gets reported. Can you go into some depth on that and explain to people what we should be thinking about and how to sort of take all of this in context when you're hearing some, things about, the nature of the universe, or the reason the UFOs are here, or what's going on with 3i Atlas. There's a lot of stuff out there.
Yeah. So like I alluded to earlier, a lot of what I consider to be the left-hand turns that kind of are causing trouble, I say in the modern RV community, but really a lot of this, as you would see on the chart, the splintering and, just necessary kind of divisions of things, I guess, even if you put it more kindly than that, were going on in the 90s. Like, these are all very old conversations that are still happening, and people still haven't come to grips with them. But as psi and now psionics and different, elements that are sort of being associated with remote viewing are coming into the NHI UAP conversation more and more in the last few years, a lot of this has just been kind of presented to folks who are like, what the hell was going on? Like, I didn't know any of this was going on. And this is all new to a whole new generation of people. But in some ways, it's like conversations that we've been having for 30 years. And like I was alluding to, the two biggest things that cause this issue are the questions in the protocol of what blindness means, what it can contribute to the conversation, and what feedback means, and how necessary is it, and what qualifies as feedback. So I guess if we tackle those, blindness is particularly interesting. It's obviously part of any experimental protocol, most kinds of experimental, in normal science. You're not supposed to know what's being worked on if you're in the guts of doing the thing. People have assumed that means, in a lot of cases, that what comes out the other end in a remote viewing sense can be relied upon, because, well, we didn't tell him what we were doing. And he's nevertheless described right up to the point that we expected he would, and then gone even further with some like crazy stuff that also happened there. So there's a weird thing to think about with blindness. We are saying that a remote viewer, in theory, is capable of describing any location, anywhere in space-time, past, present, future, let's say. The world is, wide open, but they can't tell what's in that envelope over there. Mm-hmm. So the tasker sets up the thing, writes out their thing, and we are willing to say that the remote viewer can remote view the entire universe, but somehow we assume that they can't tell what's in the envelope. Now, certainly at a conscious level, they can't tell what's in the envelope. That's because remote viewing is done largely from an unconscious sort of level of the mind. All you're really blinding is your conscious mind to what's in the envelope. Your unconscious mind that is capable of looking at, the submarine facility in the USSR knows exactly what's in that envelope. So in some sense, blindness is important to keep the conscious mind out of the way and avoid fabrication. But in the other sense, it's not doing the work that people think it's doing.
So blindness by itself doesn't indicate, like we said earlier, a statistical home run. If you have 2 or 3 reviewers who see something similar and they're all blind to it, that's not by itself. By itself. But and that's important for people to understand when they're hearing or looking at any kind of remote viewing stuff. Yeah.
And the other part about the way the protocol is set up with the tasking and the blindness is that we got that random number that's being assigned, and we've got the text, think about this building in this particular place and blah, 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 blah. And that's in the envelope. So even let's just allow that the remote viewer unconsciously can see what's in the envelope, because they obviously can. But we know from lots of experimental data and just people's practical experience that remote viewing does terribly at reading and numbers. Specifically, you end up, when people try to do stuff like that, you wind up with what AI was doing a while ago with like trying to do a sign, and it's like, like it has no idea how to put together a thing. So people are not, remote viewers are it's very unlikely that what they're doing is reading the cue. Something is getting to them. And what that something is the intention that the tasker is setting. What they write down is definitely a great way of anchoring that intention and sort of establishing this is what this number is about. It's setting that intention, but it is not the only information that is sort of mysteriously transmitted to the viewer to base their work on. The intention, this sounds dumb, but the intention is the intention. So if we've got this written down cue that says you're going to go see this building, I want to know what's going on inside the building, I want to know all this stuff, full stop. That's all it says. But the person who did the tasking privately thinks that there's a UFO in that building and thinks that there's grays locked up in the basement. That's their intention. They can avoid writing it into the cue. It still is available to the viewer. And we have to remember that. That is the gateway to all kinds of stuff happening. And Ingo called it telepathic overlay.
But you just compared it to AI, like almost like a hallucination, right? Like in a way. Yeah. Your consciousness is picking up on information, but it can't determine which one is the clean break between, what the tasker thinks might be real and what actually is real.
And like an old classic example of this would be that, like in the program, they would sometimes prank each other, apparently every so often, by giving somebody a Santa Claus target. So this would be the point, I guess, if people have young kids in the room, where they might want to pause the video and come back, give it a beat. That shouldn't work. Santa's not an objective reality. He's a cultural, psychic, giant, and we love him. And we better love him because,
or else.
But, Santa's not real. But you can remote view Santa. I tasked in my early days on the Yahoo thing. I asked a guy's permission to say, I said, I'm trying to figure out kind of an experimental thing about how remote viewing works. Is it okay if I just task you on something that might be, with just kind of experimental, and we'll see where it goes. And I gave this guy the blind tasking to talk about Santa and his activities in the summer. And he came back with a coherent story which basically sounded like a product development environment. I guess to me, it sounded like working on next year's stuff. And there's these guys around a table showing this one central figure who has an unusual suit, this thing that they're going to be rolling out the next year. And I thought, well, that's starting to sound like a little bit. And then the guy at the end of the table just throws back his head and laughs and laughs and laughs and laughs. And I thought, good Lord, it is Santa.
That's so interesting, because it's like what you're describing to me sounds intuitively like it just feels like it makes sense, right? Like there's an idea cloud, sort of in information space, subspace, whatever you want to call it, in some sort of like sub layer of reality. There's an information pool, and you can just by thinking associate different things into it, and then other people can reach into it and pull things out, but without a clear method or protocol or training or understanding it, I could see how you could make a lot of weird connections that aren't actually there.
A lot of stuff can happen. And so in more modern times, the folks at the Hawaii Remote Viewers Guild decided to run an experiment. They called it the Tanner Dam Project. And they basically recruited a group of remote viewers who were well-trained, knew what they were doing, multiple schools, multiple methods, not just theirs, had people tasked against this facility called the Tanner Dam, and people came back and they reported the dam and they reported the lake. Great sessions, great feedback, or great contact with the target, it seemed. People moving around in the area and so on. The results were good. People got water moving through this controlled structure and, really cool stuff like that. The problem was it wasn't real. There was no such place. There had been some notes made about what this place might be like, and they had paid somebody to paint a watercolor of this dam, and none of the viewers knew that what they were experiencing was not a real place. They reported it as a real place. It went an even weirder level, which I don't want to distract from where we're going next, but even weirder is that the movement of people that were in the town, the HRVG people had intentionally set up the movement of people as a proxy for stock market movements. Not only was it not real, but it's like there was a masked alternate layer of abstraction in this whole BS thing going on. And Daz was one of the viewers, and he was deeply troubled by this. And so back in 2017, he ran his own little project because he's like, how deep does this rabbit hole go? He created basically a target of a park down the street from his house. And it was kind of a grassy area with kind of a crossed sidewalks and so on. On his computer, in a little notepad document, he didn't draw pictures. He didn't do anything like that. He just wrote, oh yeah, by the way, while I was there, a UFO came down and burned the ground. This like 8-foot tall alien came out holding the hand of a little girl, and she was basically Goldilocks, from this kid's story. And then they left, and whoosh, and they were just gone. And 10 viewers from Daz's Facebook group worked this blind for him. They reported the park, they reported the paths, they reported the UFO, they reported the little girl. One of them even made the leap to her having a little teddy bear, which is sort of a Goldilocks Easter egg, sort of. And they didn't know that it wasn't real either. They were trying to figure out what the hell had happened to Daz. Blindness is not an insulator from getting directed by intent coming from the tasker, or this could be coming from different directions. Without feedback, you're in trouble.
This is a good spot to pivot to the UFO thing. We talked about in our initial call the Hale-Bopp situation, and that unfolded. And lately, we've got 3i Atlas, and there is a lot of anticipation and excitement around that. There's been a lot of discussion about the overlap between the remote viewing world, I guess, psychic abilities in general, and ufology. How should people think about this in the greater context when they're trying to find answers to what's going on and all of the weirdness that we're going through right now? Where does remote viewing fit into that picture, given what you were just explaining about the limitations?
Mm-hmm.
How do you square that circle?
So I guess maybe even to back it out and make it more broadly, even how does psi fit into this? Because so we've got remote viewing, which is sort of the descriptive part of it that is being used today a lot again to try to demonstrate the objective reality of things that we're not sure what they are. We don't know if there's a there sometimes. That tool, that descriptive tool of remote viewing, I would say is not well suited to that purpose unless you're really going in with a very deep understanding of don't take this too seriously, what comes out the other end. Back in the 90s, you would have these psychic phone lines that people could call in, that the ads would be on TV all late night. And they would say, Mistress Sonia can tell you this, and she can tell you this, and she can tell you this.
Cleo. Did you guys ever review in Canada? Miss Cleo, remember?
Yeah, Miss Cleo.
Call me now.
And then very fast at the end, you would get the for entertainment purposes only, kind of caveat thrown in. And I feel like that's what's happening now in some ways with remote viewing, where people will pay lip service to, sometimes you can't tell. We don't have feedback on this yet, but isn't it interesting? Isn't it interesting to think about? And then they will go off and they will go on a podcast tour, or they will launch a book, or they will whatever. And even though the, for entertainment purposes only is technically covered, their entire reason for being in the space is to talk about these things that are potentially problematic. When we say that a target has to have feedback for it to be remote viewing, that's a thing that Ingo said. Ingo changed his mind a lot about different things over the years. Most people, I think even most of the major schools today would say, there are times when you're not necessarily going to get feedback. Sometimes in the military unit, they didn't get feedback about a particular project. But we need to really attune ourselves to the difference between feedback may be difficult to get, we might have to wait, versus this is completely unfeedbackable. Realistically, we're never going to know whether this is right or not. You can take this finely tuned machinery that Ingo designed and point it at Santa Claus, and you can come back with a coherent narrative, and you can just kind of say, for entertainment purposes only, but go on a book tour. And right now that's selling.
And if this were in a military or intelligence context, remote viewing would be one piece of information that an analyst would combine with many other things, satellite imagery, radio intercepts, human intelligence, all kinds of, and it would be a piece of this. So when we're in civilian world, just thinking about UFOs broadly or something specific, there is no corroborating information that we can draw upon to get that kind of feedback. That's what you're saying, right?
Well, not necessarily, I guess. In a lot of cases, not necessarily. Now, one cool exception I was mentioning to you earlier, where it's been done kind of more carefully, is another remote viewer in the UK called Tunde Atunreze did a book where he hired Joe McMoneagle to go through a list of sort of famous UFO cases and do his best at them. And it is called, I have it over here, Remote Viewing UFOs and the Visitors. It's a cool. Too much glare.
I'll have to add another
some of
the
famous stories, Joe said, no, that was like our tech, or that was a misunderstanding or whatever. And other ones, he's like, that's pretty weird. Now Joe is quite clear. There's no feedback for some of these. So we are approaching it this way. But so it's not like you should never do this. Like, I'm not saying that, but the arguments that I've heard made really strongly that, people describing most of a scenario correctly under blind conditions and then leaping off into, and also this other series of things, it doesn't necessarily follow. And the fact that they can do the first part does not mean that the second part should be taken seriously. If there's no feedback possible, realistically, you have to hold it loosely, and you have to hold it loosely so clearly and transparently to your audience to say, we're going wild here and seeing what comes out the other end. And I don't see that happening in some contexts. And the accuracy questions get kicked around. When we had the chart up earlier, you've got that very early iteration, which was TRV, technical remote viewing. The folks in that specific school, Ed's claim was that it was 100% accurate. If it's done properly, 100% accurate. And then proceeded to, I do not know how many times, specifically predict the end of the world and various other things.
That was the last time I saw him and I was taking it seriously. He was predicting the end of the world. This was years and years ago. Yeah.
And he's not the only person that has made these claims of extraordinarily high. There's that. There's a solar flares on specific dates, and by the way, I'll sell you a map for the safe places you can go hide, and claims of extraordinary accuracy, despite it being unfeedbackable, is really common and has been going on since way back then. This is
And you'll hear, sometimes we hear the term like military grade remote viewing. That's
Yes.
the term I've heard, military grade, which is, I guess, implies a certain level of reliability and expectation.
And like I said, you're using the term remote viewing in some sense sort of is trading on the credibility of this program that had to fight for its life year to year. People like Joe would have to go sit in front of these congressional panels and do a live unscripted session, and then they would be like, all right, you get your funding. This is a hardcore. They were doing like real operational work and providing intelligence that was having real world consequences. And so when modern folks say that they're remote viewing and tie themselves into that lineage, they should stick to some of the definitions, I think.
Right. It's one thing if you can send in a SEAL team and they can go get pictures of the site and they can verify, like, oh yeah, we found the hostages. They were in the building, and you get that feedback and you go, okay. Versus, I think there might be, live beings on 3i Atlas doing something, and there's no way to check that.
And next week, I'll talk to you about something specific to do with a hybridization facility I know about. And next week, I'll talk about this and the sort of expectation that some of these organizations or people are going to publicly do work where it can be really clearly demonstrated whether they've got their chops or not is no longer part of the conversation. It's just all that's being done is things that basically generate internet clout in some cases. And that was true in the 90s, and it's true now. And the truth is that the people that really do this work carefully are doing meaningful stuff quietly that is not always out there. Now, that's the descriptive RV applied to UFOs. The psi, just generally aspect, is this current open conversation about what is going on with these people coming forward and saying that they're like the Skywatcher people and the people using psionic stuff that apparently is out of, they say, a military program that is sort of down the line from the Stargate program in some conceptual.
And you've got also, we're recording this on October 20th, and we had just a few months ago, the Telepathy Tapes was the #1 podcast in the world. You had these nonverbal children who were able to somehow transmit information back and forth, and they could collectively get together in some sort of mental third space where they could commune with each other in a group, and it was totally natural and normal for them. And then we were just talking about Dan Sherman and Gordon Jozak.
Jozak,
Dan Sherman was interviewed on American Alchemy, Jesse Michaels' amazing channel, and talked about being recruited into a NSA psychic communications program where he was sort of mentally, telepathically communicating with non-humans and having something of a conversation with, I managed to ask a question or two and got an answer or two. We had a little bit of an exchange. And it seems like all of this stuff has just recently kind of emerged, but as a offshoot of the larger UFO conversation. And I think, as you said earlier, it's caught a lot of people by surprise.
Mm-hmm.
Seems like a really weird...
certainly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think? What do you make of it? What's your take on the connection here?
Well, I do think, like I was saying, that it's incredibly suspicious just from a general perspective that based on why the American military got interested in remote viewing in the first place, which was that the Soviets were doing offensive, outward bound psi, it seems a little silly that we would just stop at being able to draw pictures good. And that program essentially ended right around the time that some people were going public with Jim Schnabel and some other kind of publicity that the program started to get when it was still supposed to be classified. And then it was, shuttered. And we know, as Hal said, that he was approached about doing something else. And we're hearing from some of these newer whistleblowers that a completely different direction was taken later. I don't know how to assess those claims, but I do know that even in the original public stuff about the program, such as it was, there is lots of information if you look for it about kind of active psi. Lynn Buchanan talks about remote influencing as being a thing that is both possible, and I believe he has said he was even formally asked to do during probably Desert Storm in a particular instance. there is that aspect to what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
For a very long time, it was taboo to talk about remote influencing within the remote viewing community. It was kind of that's just people's stories. And there was this kind of pervasive, kind of dismissive tone to it, when in fact it was actually happening. And the Soviets had been at least claiming to have done the same thing. So to extend that forward into kind of outbound psi and the way that it might tie into UAPs, one of the biggest shocks for me in being involved in remote viewing was in 2017, 2018, when Hal gave that talk. And right around that time, the conversation started to pivot. And I realized the extent to which people that were showing up as integral to the UFO story were people that I knew, were people that had been coming to conferences and presenting at conferences. And I was describing it as these two fandoms, and why can't we just keep those topics out? But to find out that some of these people have been deeply involved in very specific government work around this topic was a real shakeup for me. The other day, there was Paul Smith was interviewed on a podcast, and he was talking about the fact that during the program that ran out of Bigelow Aerospace, he was hired, Hal, as his project manager, as part of that project to look at the Nimitz incident. As part of either the OSAP or I get confused with, everybody gets confused, I think, with some of that, but official taskings within that stuff, I had never known that.
And Bigelow's such a weird figure too. I mean, you're talking about eccentric billionaire with an alien painted on the side of his building.
Yeah.
Who's done funded studies into afterlife, proof of the afterlife and psychic phenomena and all kinds. He's deeply involved in all this.
He's deeply involved. And at that same conference, when Hal gave that talk, the participants in the conference were able to do a field trip to that facility, to Bigelow's facility. As a Canadian, I couldn't go.
Oh,
because
really?
There's like restrictions. Yeah. So I got to go to a gold mine instead, which I don't want to brag, but the gold mine was pretty good, and I figure I made out okay. But no, more seriously, like there's a freaking building in Las Vegas with an alien painted on the side of it, and I didn't get to go in there. But anyway, and I was helping run the conference.
To hear Bigelow talk, he says he's positive. He's 100% sure. He's like, oh yeah, there's aliens for sure.
Yeah.
And he's like, and then he does that thing where there's one interview where I really like, where he kind of like, he always sort of like hedges everything. He sort of like does this thing where he tilts his head. He's like, well, some people say you could sit right next to one and you'd never know. You'd never know. Maybe they're all around. Maybe they're walking around. I don't know. Yeah. And I'm like, you do know.
Yeah.
Don't toy with my emotions, Bob.
Well, and this psi tie-in to the NHI topic goes way back. Because the stuff that happened at the Monroe Institute in Virginia, for example, they were bringing in some of the early remote viewers to train on those techniques. And if you look at, what Bob Monroe reports in his own, trips, so to speak, out of body and into different spaces, and some of the stuff that the folks have reported there, and what still happens to this day when people use these techniques, is contact with NHI, fundamentally. And that is the lineage that we ultimately get the Stargate program out of, some of these people. There is a fundamental connection there that I'm not prepared to ignore anymore.
I feel like that has been probably the biggest evolution in my thinking in the last 25 years, was just that big shift. I spent probably a solid year just diving into the history of psi phenomena and RV and trying to watch all of the interviews I could watch, and just reading books and getting up to speed on it. And at the end of it, it's more confusing than ever. Like I'm even more lost than I was before.
Yeah.
But I feel like I have more information, which is sort of paradoxical in that way.
Yeah.
Do you think, in your view, is remote viewing an individual tool within a larger suite of psi abilities that are available to us? Or are we talking about more or less just one sort of sensory organ that works in a bunch of different ways, and we're able to pick up all kinds of different information and transmit as well as receive? Are they different things, or are they the same thing?
I think psi is just sort of a subset, or psi, RV. Remote viewing is a subset of a much larger set of things. And there are a lot of things you can do with psi, with or without remote viewing methodologies, or using them as a way to kind of just, we're not going to call it remote viewing, but we'll go over here and do this. There are opportunities where this whole telepathy business that supposedly just gets in the way of remote viewing is not a bug. Like, it's a feature. It's a bug if you think that you are using a tachyoscope, or you think that you are using some kind of electronic analysis thing that will just always give you exactly the reality. Then, telepathy becomes like a problem, and you can get these crazy results and stuff like that. But if you lean into it and you think about ways that it can be used, we're talking about, on the extreme end, things like the CE5 stuff that people are talking about. But we're also talking about simple things like, I helped teach a course here in Canada at one point. A friend of mine was running it and I was TAing, and she was interested in how this could all be used in different directions. And so she would have people blindly targeted against target cues like, bring forward the person of John Lennon and have a conversation with him about music and stuff like that. This is just people sitting around a kitchen table in somebody's house. And I will never forget this woman who had never done any of this before, did not know what she had been tasked with, and started writing and then started reading it out loud to us. And I knew what it was. And I just started bawling because it was lyrics. Like, it was like a lost Beatles song. Who cares if that's remote viewing? Like, that's cool. Like, that's to be able to do stuff like that. I know through Stephen Schwartz that Crichton. Why am I blanking on Jurassic Park?
Oh, Michael Crichton.
Michael Crichton. I don't know why I lost his last name. Michael Crichton actually used RV.
Is that right?
Or RVers, at least, to provide some sort of background information that he used in certain of his novels.
He wrote Sphere.
Yeah.
Which was about a UFO at the bottom of the ocean.
Yeah. I rewatched that about a year ago and just about died because the congruence with stuff that's being talked about now is so solid that you're just like,
and
wow.
You want to hear something else? This is a fun trivia. The guy in Sphere who brings the team together, the Peter Coyote is the actor. He's sort of the team lead that recruits everybody onto the thing. He's the guy who narrates all of James Fox's documentaries. And I actually walked up to James in DC. I got a chance to talk to him for about 2 seconds. And I just walked up and I was like, I just want you to know that Peter Coyote is one of my favorite voiceover guys. And he's one of my favorite actors. And I just love that you use him and everything. And he was like, oh my God, thanks. Well, we had this whole little thing about it. But just weird connections, to the UFO thing. Yeah. So the Psi toolkit is full of various different things, and we're just beginning to get an idea of what those are, right?
Yeah.
And RV is one tool.
Yeah.
In that kit.
Yeah.
But it seems
and
like
I love all this other cool stuff. I wish people wouldn't call it RV.
Yeah.
Because I think it muddies the waters and it creates a sense of certainty where there doesn't belong one. But doing all this cool stuff is like, knock yourselves out. Like, it's amazing.
What do you think of there was this thing called the Psi Games recently. I don't know if you followed that. Did you pay any attention to? What do you think about that? This idea of gamifying it. And what do you think about formal training for people who want to learn how to do it? It seems like such a murky area, like how do you, is there a sanctioned or high level course or something that is sort of widely accepted as being reputable and strong and good for people who want to understand this stuff?
I mean, it depends who you talk to a little bit. There are folks, like I said, who are very much the only thing really worth doing is Ingo's, as close to possible doing Ingo's thing. But like we talked about, that introduces, even though that is fantastic and genius, it does introduce structure and sort of physical limitations to a thing that was very organic before and still is. There are folks who don't believe. Again, Dr. Ed May, who went on to run some remote viewing research at SAIC later in the Stargate years, believes that training is not actually effective, or has maintained that for a long time. That actually it's just basically people bring to the table a certain aptitude and with basic instruction.
I
they
wonder
can get themselves out of the way.
Have you ever heard of any discussion by indigenous people about the way that maybe this was done in ancient times or in past times? But, I feel like there's an enormous reservoir of indigenous knowledge that's thousands of years old. These are people who are not afraid of this stuff, that they deal with it. It's part of their tapestry of reality. Not in every case, but I'm just saying in many cases. And then, of course, we have our Western sort of materialistic way of sort of trying to put everything into a box and understand exactly how it works. Are there other approaches, that take a different view?
I think there's enormous opportunity for lots of other approaches. Like in the first place, we have taken a natural thing, which is reported all through those cultures and continues to this day because it's not, the purview of any one culture. It's just kind of a human thing. But we've taken that and for the purposes of these kind of projects, jammed it into the scientific replicability kind of thing, which is good in a way. In other ways, we've just we've taken a thing and we've colonized it, I guess.
Right.
What we've done.
I guess I'm wondering if by doing that, are we weakening it? Is there a purer path, you know what I mean, towards, and we talked a little bit in our email exchange about the use of psychedelics to get as a tool to sort of get from here to there. I've had my own experience. I don't know if I've shared this with you, but I have my own experience with psychedelics that was a precognitive event that totally changed my whole world. So I'm very interested in this idea.
It'll do that.
What you think about it?
It'll do that, and I have had my own experiences there as well, which I feel safe talking about because I have reached a point where I'm actually sort of retired. I'm a retired psychonaut now, very specifically, and for reasons that get too bizarre to probably detail. But there is a level of access to information there and understanding of a more fundamental understanding of what's really going on. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you come out of those experiences having, I'll say, sat in the backyard and decided that the little metal cardinal that sits in your garden is a divine being, and you can sit there on a little cushion and you can like really drink in just the divine thing. That's probably not helpful in sort of developing a cosmology, anything like that. But there's other things that happen in psychedelic spaces, particularly if you're sort of repeatedly going in and you're paying attention to the trends and you're doing it carefully, safely, somewhere legally, of course, that repeat and come back again and again and again, and I believe represent a structural set of clues about our reality. Yeah. And that for me has been completely unrelated to remote viewing. I can't really draw any kind of lines between that at all. But in terms of the NHI question and UFOs, the level of integration between those is astonishing. And I really believe that certain types of experiences should be considered contact experiences in a lot of ways in both categories.
The psychedelic thing really dissolved this idea of a physical, solid world, and it gave me access to a much larger picture of reality that made things make more sense. Intuitive things, manifestation, things that just sort of, you're thinking about something and then it happens, or just little things in life. And I somehow was able to create this opening for me to reconcile the strangeness that you see in everyday life with a system that actually kind of does make sense. It's just behind the curtain. It's all happening under the hood, and we're only seeing the surface level, like the icons on the desktop. Yeah. But the software underneath is running and doing all these different things. And I feel like, I haven't done a ton of psychedelics, but the one session that I had was an ayahuasca session. It was really deep. It was a lot in one session, and it was I prepared for weeks before. I went on a vegan diet, no sugar, no caffeine, no anything. I did the whole prep thing. And there's this whole procedure. And then going into that space, I got downloads, I got precognition about things that were, at the time, just they would be later confirmed and in a really spectacular way. And I was just really shocked.
In the real world, all sort of like the confirmation things were happening.
I'll tell you, my wife and I, we're almost 20 years now together, and for This was many years ago when I did the session. I was in my 30s at the time, but we weren't biologically able to have kids. It was just something that was a reality for us. We talked to a number of different doctors, and there was just medical reasons why it wasn't going to happen for us. And when I had my ayahuasca session, I had a clear as day vision of a little kid, this little child that looked to me like it looked like a energy being, like a little spirit. If you can imagine what the spirit of a little excited toddler, running into a room like that. Yeah. This just came to me and I saw it. I saw it in my mind's eye, and it was very real. And I had this emotional connection to it. And then I couldn't quite figure out what to do with it. And it was one moment out of a very long session, 4 or 5 hour long session. Yeah. But a few years later, we found out we were pregnant. We were going to have a kid, and we had one child, and that was my son. And when I met him, and as he's growing up, and now he's just turned 4, that's the kid I saw. Years before he was born, at a time when we didn't believe it was possible, and for me, that changed everything. That is what I saw. And I just, I think to a certain degree, it's, you have to just decide you're going to believe it. You have to have faith in it. Yeah.
Yeah. I've come to the conclusion that there's people, especially in this space, people are asking you to believe a whole bunch of things. And then this happens and that happens. You think, oh no, that person is just like a wrestling figure instead. All these, I finally decided, I think what I'm going to do is just figure out what I think I'm going to believe. And some of that came out of these experiences with psychedelics.
Have you ever had another psychic experience that wasn't necessarily remote viewing that you interpreted as like a real experience? I'm thinking specifically about how Dan Sherman, in that interview with Jesse Michaels. Yeah. Right. He talks about, and you watched the whole thing, right? So you'll remember this part.
It was a long one.
It's a big, I wish he released them in 3 parts, but neither here nor there. But he talked about when he was talking to this non-human being, and he was describing, and Jesse was like, well, what did it feel like? Did you hear the words, or how did it feel? And he was trying to describe, he's like, it's like there's a layer in your mind. It's like a place, and I can localize it, but I couldn't point to it here. It's inside the consciousness. I can feel it. Yeah. And he was really struggling to kind of put it into words. And I think immediately made me think of like when someone tries to describe a psychedelic breakthrough.
All my lights were going off when he was talking about that. I was like, holy crap. You like, okay, probably he wasn't. I mean, they're saying that they give them these little pills, but I don't imagine those were psychedelics. But he's having an experience that is clearly mappable onto something that you and I obviously both know how it is. Yeah. Language and I would say that, for people that want to try to find out about this in perhaps a more legal way, the Monroe Institute stuff, I have found the experiences of, frankly, NHI contact or some kind of contact that happened through Monroe exercises are close enough to this that I draw definite connections. It's not all just in your head. I'll throw a quick Monroe Institute story in. I have been for 2 of their in-person week-long programs. Everybody does Gateway. And then you get to pick something else. And the second one I did was their guidelines program, which is about contacting guides and sort of having this sort of guidance aspect. I ran into my great-grandfather who died before I was even born, and sort of a family hero to me because he kind of was off on all these adventures in the Middle East and stuff back in the 30s, all this cool stuff. And he's telling me all these things about this trip and this experience. But I'm having this experience at the Monroe Institute, and the sounds are playing and you're doing all this stuff, and you don't really know, how does this relate to like the real world? Like, is this all just having some fun, things playing in my head? That would be cool, even on its own. But I drove back the 12 hours from Virginia to where I live after that program was done, and crashed and went to sleep, and woke up the next day and opened my front door. And there was my great-grandfather's fruit farm, a basket, a 6-quart basket with the imprint of his farm from years and years and years ago on my front doorstep. And I later in the week was able to kind of reconstruct that somebody in town had found it in their house, had called my mom and said, I think you guys should have this. And my mom said, well, I don't have room for it, and basically dropped it off and didn't announce her presence because she knew I was tired and stuff like that. But what the hell? Like, this is stuff that spills over into the ostensibly real world.
Yeah.
In these synchronicities, and the same types of things have happened in the psychedelic space. And it isn't all just in your head. We are connecting with a thing.
I think the indigenous wisdom around, shamanic practices and stuff, I think a lot of it, and this is just my, I don't know any, I'm just a white guy. I have no idea, but my wife's Peruvian and so I have some experience with it, but it's technology. The psychedelics are a technology. It's a form of technology. It's a spiritual technology. And it's a way, and there's a process, and the shaman has to do a thing, and there's a whole series of things that have to happen in an order, and then this opens a gateway. This is my understanding, and then you were able to kind of pass through this soft membrane between this world and whatever lies just, for my experience, my visual experience actually in the moment when I drank like about a coffee cup, about half of a cup of ayahuasca, so it was about like this much. It was a lot.
Yeah.
But after it took effect, the room I was in evaporated like steam, and I was still in a space. I was occupying I was still present, but the universe was just endless, and I was not on the floor anymore. The room was gone. The people were gone. I was just in this space, and I definitely felt like afterward it had clicked something. It flipped a switch or activated a circuit or turned something on. Coming back from it, I was able to tap into that.
Yes.
Better.
Yes. And that's probably persisted, right, in some way.
If I meditate and if I stick to it and I focus on it, it's like a muscle and you can strengthen it, but you have to learn that you have it and then understand that it works. And then you can start to strengthen it. But I didn't know any of this at the time.
And the active psychedelic in ayahuasca being DMT, DMT gets a lot of hype at the moment. And I don't know if you know Andrew Gallimore's,
I'm familiar with what he's doing.
Yeah. So he had, just to randomly cite something, there's a YouTube video of his that I forget who's interviewing him, but the title is DMT is Alien Disclosure. And of course I was like, listen to this thing.
I saw this, yeah.
And his books make the same point, I think, but also he's basically, I think, taking the position of people go into this space, they have these consistent encounters with very consistent setups to the point that they are putting people into these extended trips to try to map the space and all this, these sorts of things. And there are entities outside of this reality that you are consistently interacting with. And he's basically like, what do you people want?
Which is funny because that's basically what Jacques Vallée talked about. And all of these other people, there's like, look, for all of human history, there's weirdness. So it's this one consistent thread that we just have all been noodling around. But at the end of the day, I think that's what we're coming into contact with. It's that same weirdness.
Yeah.
But I like Andrew's method. I actually would love to talk to him. I haven't had the opportunity yet, but I'm going to reach out to him about just mapping the space. Mm-hmm. I'm curious what progress they've made, if any, if they've managed to, if everyone who does DMT sees machine elves, and are they seeing the same machine elves? Are they seeing them?
Yeah.
Are they saying the same things?
Yeah.
Is there a consistency?
And I was very careful
from their vantage point.
Once I decided to start exploring that space, I hadn't read a lot of McKenna. I knew enough about stuff that this is a thing that I probably have decided I'm going to look into, but I basically stopped paying attention to anybody. I didn't watch anybody's stuff, and I spent 2 years looking into it. And so, because I didn't want to preload myself with a bunch of imagery and stuff like that. And it doesn't matter. It's you come out the other end, and the stories are just remarkably consistent and know what people are talking about when you're sharing a conversation with them, and they're like, oh, there's that aspect of it, and you're like, I know, there's something going on. And about Vallée, like, yes, that's basically what sort of a space that he's talking about, is this kind of element of contact with something outside that masks itself in different ways. Everybody in UFO world reveres Vallée. Mm-hmm. But then we go for nuts and bolts and say, yeah. It's all just about crash recovery.
I think it makes sense though, because you've got to have some kind of starting point, right? Like if there's a machine in a building somewhere, at least we can go there. You know,
Yeah.
we can chase down the other questions later, but we need to find out, you know, what do we even have? What is this stuff?
Yeah.
I could see, you know, I do see the reasoning behind it, but
And
I'm with you. Like
I agree that people aren't ready for that broadly.
And what if the real disclosure is like, hey, guess what? We're all psychic and it's real. And there's like this whole spirit realm. It's just, you know, we call it whatever you want, but
we're in a construct, and I'm not convinced. I think people could handle ETs and spaceships.
I feel like you're right.
I think that there'd be some shock. There'd be some, I don't know what people would handle about this being a construct and all of that. Like,
people would hear, if you told everybody there were aliens today, they would be shocked for a day, maybe a week, and then everybody would just go back to work because it would be like, okay, there's a new country we didn't know about. There's people there.
Well, that's what the last 5 years have taught us. Like, people just get used to the weirdest thing you can imagine throwing at them.
At this point, it would be pretty much the least crazy thing. I mean, it'd be actually pretty tame.
Yeah.
Compared to everything else that's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah. John, I could talk to you for another 2 hours, but we've been at it almost 3 right now. So I want to be respectful of your time. But is there anything that we haven't got to yet that you want to include before we wrap up?
I think the only thing is that occasionally the topic will come up of, you know, what RV has most taught me, I guess, which I love to talk about. The realization that a part of you has access to everything, everywhere, all at once, all the time. And that whether you consider yourself a remote viewer or conversant with psi or not, you've got, you know, family that doesn't or whatever, but all of us have this part of us that has access to everything. And if you strip away the rest of it, I think it's Russell Targ likes to just say, there are no secrets. Yeah. There is something that happened to me, I'm going to say morally, when the reality of this really got integrated into my understanding of how things are. Sure, sometimes it doesn't work. Sure, sometimes you're off doing something, but fundamentally, we are all connected at a deep level. We all know what we're all up to at every point. And what does that make you do? How does that make you behave towards people? And that has been probably the most important, and not having all cool stories, you know, of weird stuff that happened, which is fun, but this level of
deeper connection,
and truly understanding your responsibility at a better level anyway to your fellow humans.
In the Christian context, and from your theological background, do you think that's what's meant by this idea of like the kingdom of God is within you? Mm-hmm. It's like the secrets, the access to the whole is inside each individual person.
Yeah. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of that stuff now that I have come to either through the psychedelic angle or through this kind of broader thing where I realize, oh my God, like my grandfather had so many things wrong, but so many things right, you know, like that kind of core, I think, that sits at the heart of a lot of useful philosophies and spiritualities in the world. And I know people are getting really wound up now about people suddenly declaring God, you know, in the middle of a UFO conversation. And I understand that reflex better than most people. I think the kind of don't be bringing things into this. You don't have to drag that word into it necessarily, but there is some deep messaging behind some of this stuff that we really need to pay attention to and do something about.
John, we're going to have to leave it there, but this has been so much fun, man. Yeah, we got to do this again. I want to have you back on again, and we'll dig into this some more. If someone wants to explore remote viewing, what resource should they start with to get their footing and figure out where to go next?
Well, so even though, as I said, I don't speak for the International Remote Viewing Association anymore, IRVA.org is a great place to start. They're a nonprofit. 501(c) is the terminology in the States. That's, you know, basically trying to educate people properly about this. Daz's material is great. Don't feel like you need to go out and spend thousands of dollars on training your first week into this. Particularly if you think that the outcome down the road is going to be that you're going to actually be a paid psychic spy.
Don't set out with that.
I'm going to guess that might not happen. Didn't happen for me. Anyway, there's a lot of things you can do. There are people that are happy to teach you for relatively little or nothing, or there are books. There's a thing called natural remote viewing, which is sort of all of that other stuff stripped away and just kind of the protocol. This is by a guy named John Noble, who sat with me on the IRVA board for a number of years. And it's just basically the basic how to do remote viewing without being sort of dragged into so-and-so's methodology or fights about this, that, or the other thing. You can learn how to do this for nothing, and you can explore a space and learn something mostly about yourself.
And of try not to get caught up in the sensationalism too, I think would be a good advice for people. Just go learn about remote viewing. Start there.
Yeah.
Don't get caught up in the stories that, may be circulating around about what could or could not be going on. Wow. John, thank you so much for your time, man. I'm going to let you go, but I'll circle back in a day or two with an email, and then we'll get this thing
great
posted. But this has been awesome.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on.